welcome to the Solo for Life podcast. Today I have a guest. His name is Manney. He has a YouTube channel where he performs all these challenges within the From Software games plus other games. And been wanting to talk to someone like this for a while, especially how I've been dipping my toes into it as well. But he's been definitely been more experienced in that field of challenge a lot longer than I have. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself again.
Yeah, my name is Matthew Manney, as you said. Appreciate you having me on the show. Just wanted to talk to him. He's a friend of mine. Met him through YouTube, and yeah.
Yes, we actually talked for the first time months ago, and we finally got to talk again today. Just a lot of stuff going on in between, but thankfully we can finally release our precious takes on Elden Ring. I know Matthew definitely has a ton of stuff he wants to say, so let's
Yeah,
try to see if we can squeeze as much as we can in 2 hours. No rush, but definitely see if we can articulate in a way that we can discuss among each other on how we feel about Elden Ring.
should I start with kind of like a quick history on my Elden Ring experience? Like, do we want any kind of backstory here on
Oh,
this?
go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with the Soul series in general. I started playing technically. Kingsfield 4 was my first FromSoft game.
Nice.
Um, yeah, Yeah, and that was my first time experiencing like killing an NPC and realizing that they don't come back. And it was on accident too. It was like this girl, and I think she had a dog from what I remember, and she like the dog was like mad at me for killing the girl and attacked or whatever. But I don't know, that kind of like hit different, because it was like my first time in a game where I like regretted something and felt bad.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what made like the dark fantasy genre like special to me. And Dark Souls came out, and obviously started playing that, and got through my first time. And like anyone who plays Dark Souls and beats it, it's just that rewarding feeling, and you just want to do it again. So I calculated a way that I could experience it again for the first time. So I started off trying to do I pick a class. So I chose Wanderer, and I wasn't gonna change anything, upgrade anything, try to just go base Wanderer class, and that kicked my butt. It was way too hard. Um, there was just so little I could do without upgrading, and I was still pretty new at the game. It was my second run. So I reevaluated what I wanted to do where it was still restrictive, and I was like, okay, well, I'll pick the lowest level class I can, and I'll see how much I can upgrade stuff, get out there and do it. So I ended up doing a level 1 run. I restricted myself to like melee only and all that. So because I like to immerse, I like to feel like a weak being that's overcoming insurmountable challenges. It's fun.
Yes.
Um, and I ended up doing that. That was my first like level 1 challenge, and that was pretty close to the time of release. Um, so since then, I've made it kind of a habit to like, do level 1 runs on any type of Souls game. So Dark Souls 2 did that. Code Vein, Neo, stuff like that. But since Dark Souls 3, I started doing them like for my first run as level 1, so that way I can like have that immersion. I can feel that challenge because like everybody plays the game the normal way, right? So to kind of keep it feeling fresh for me, so it's not just like going in there and kicking everything's butt,
Mm-hmm.
I just have my own way of gauging it for myself, and that's usually level 1. And it works with most games, and then there's some like Code Vein where it gets pretty rough because the game's not very good. It is for the most part, but that's a whole nother story.
Hmm.
Um, and then Elden Ring comes around, and I did the same thing. So I'm sure people can imagine as a level 1 going through Elden Ring, it presents challenges, some that people don't really expect. And it started off a wonderful adventure, tons of new stuff to see. It was wonderful. It was just a world of discovery, and I was completely enthralled. I loved it, every single moment. I loved creating my character. I loved the first experiences, just going out into the world and meticulously picking it apart. And I really had no complaints to start until I started going through and trying to 100% everything within everything up to the capital. And that's when I started, noticing repeat bosses and stuff, which didn't bother me that much because it wasn't too bad. some of them were a little bad, but they were so easy it didn't really bother me. Like the tree spirit, I think it is, or not the tree spirit. The one that's pretty much Asylum Demon. That one's all over the place, but it wasn't a problem. So once I had gotten to the capital, that was a fresh experience, everything in the capital was new and fun. And I was like, man, this is really exciting. I'm digging this again because I had some rough points on my way there, where it was just kind of redundant and I was fighting like triple Crystallion. That was a nightmare. Um, but then I finally get there, do the capital, defeat Morgott, and it was the worst experience I'd ever had in a Souls game from then forward. It was just there was nothing new. There's like around 8 or 9 like new faces that you meet, new enemies. That's including bosses, and that's it. Everything else is just repeat reskins with massive AoE stacked on top. And that was over half of my experience was post capital because there were so many bosses that were just ridiculous ganks, uh, cheesy AoE spamming enemies, like every enemy that you had fought before, but this time with an AoE or a roar. And I ended up spending so much time fighting like that black bird thing, whatever, and the frost dragon, uh, Godskin duo in the Spirit Caller cave. And by the time I actually got to the Godskin duo, I had fought them each 3 times each, right? So when I came to this battle, I was like, are you serious? This is real. I have to fight them again. And then they came back to life. So I didn't like Godskin duo at first, not even a little bit. In fact, it was the one fight where I just decided to cheese it, kind of. Still partook in the fight. It was clear I knew what I was doing, but I was using sleep. So, is what it is. But I don't know. I did not have a good thing with Elden Ring. It was just too much. I'd spend too much time grinding just the same things over and over where I'm like, okay, now I'm fighting this boss again, and I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't
Hmm.
wasn't fun by that point. But once I got to the end, I got to Melania, and the area before Melania was awful. It was making me really dislike the game, and it was really bringing me down because it was just so full of tons of enemies slammed together, bosses being reused, thrown around the levels, um, just tons of really cheap enemies and encounters where there's very little thought put into it, and it was clearly balanced around higher level characters, which I would say is normal, but it's not for a FromSoft game. They're always very careful about their enemy placement, making sure that challenges can be overcome by any means. And they still could, but not without extreme amounts of time invested, and it just wasn't worth it. And I don't know. I got to Melania, and at first I was like, kind of excited, and it wasn't until people started like joining the stream and like kind of cheering me on where I was like getting back into it, and then I ended up really enjoying Melania. Um, Took a few days to like take her out that way because I had no clue what any of her mechanics were, and I had to figure it out myself. And the only thing I could really say that I hate about Melania is waterfowl, because it's bad. It really is.
Hmm.
And some of her mechanics, her stagger mechanics, I was fooled into thinking that if you parried her 3 times and got the riposte, it would reset the stagger buildup, which was false. But because, well, I had tested it, so I got her to the point where she would stagger and then staggered her, right? And I had found a consistent timing for that. So I was like, okay. So I started incorporating parrying, and I noticed I didn't get a stagger a couple times with like the same timing. But it turns out it was because I was getting a stagger during hyper armor frames or something. I don't know. Where she couldn't be staggered, right? It was not possible. She's the only enemy in the game, right? In all of them, where she gets immunity from that. So it was just kind of goofy, and I ended up going a very long time thinking that I had to either parry or stagger or alternate between them entirely. And it just kind of like broke up the flow of the fight because I tried to get like a really intimate, like toe-to-toe fight with her. which I did. I ended up getting a pretty good one, but
Hmm.
um, I don't know. I ended up also using Bloodhound Step for waterfowl, which at the time was fine, but it got me a lot of like hate for it, where people thought it was like a bad kill because I used Bloodhound Step for that move. And I also used Cold and Bleed on my single katana. I wasn't dual wielding, so I didn't feel like it was cheap, but it still didn't matter. I don't know. It was a rough experience. I did enjoy the fight, but just like the backlash I'd get on things for doing things blind, right? It just kind of felt defeating. And then I gave PvP a go, and that ended up being kind of the same experience where it was just not what it used to be. It was just a whole bunch of like unbalanced stuff, a whole bunch of in-game skill over player skill kind of balancing where you could easily get overtaken by something that you had no real way of avoiding. Like you could get checkmated really easy.
Hmm.
And I feel that way about the bosses too. But there was a lot of good in there, trickled in between. And Millennia did end up being a good thing ultimately, despite kind of the negative response I got from it after the first like week. But I don't know. It actually destroyed gaming for me for a while, Elden Ring did, where I didn't enjoy games anymore. There was no satisfaction in them. I'd turn on a game and just not even feel it, just wouldn't excite me at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, it completely destroyed it. So I ended up getting into other things altogether. I got into like music production and stuff and just started finding other things that I enjoyed because of Elden Ring, which is wild because I loved the Dark Souls games and I still to this day love Elden Ring. I ended up uh few weeks, it might have been a month or something after I'd like quit playing it. I went back because of my friend Xeria and started playing it again. And did like a new save, started rushing to New Game 7 so I could do some of those kills and just try to have like fun with it again. And what I ended up finding was in that rush to New Game 7, I was riding my horse for 10 minutes, running through, grabbing an item, riding my horse for 10 minutes, grabbing something, killing a boss, riding my horse for 10 minutes, and it was just this back and forth where I was just riding my horse, killing essential bosses, pushing forward. And that was it. There was like no incentive to do anything else. The bosses that I had to fight were not the good ones. Some of them were like Margit, Morgott. Uh, it's there's a few others here and there like Malekith and everything, but didn't enjoy it. By the last new game cycle, I got pretty proficient at it where I was just breezing through it, but I still didn't enjoy it. It was mostly riding my horse, going through these boring environments where there's nothing to interact with like there is in Dark Souls. Like
Hmm.
in Dark Souls, every level is handcrafted. You go through it, you're encountering every enemy, you're not riding past them on your horse. Like it's nice to look at a vista, but the vista is not going to keep your attention for the entirety of the game, right? It's just there to give context to everything else, right?
Hmm.
In Dark Souls, you have these vistas and it gives context, but then you have this whole interconnected world to play in while you're there, right? Elden Ring, it doesn't feel like that. It's like you're just wasting time watching yourself ride across a field, which can be fun, um, to get to the next place that's interesting. And really, it's not the combat encounters, which it should be. Dark Souls has always been really fun for like the combat encounters, and this time around, it feels like ultimately you're trying to avoid them or fight when you have to. And I tried to encounter everything. I tried to fight everything because it's how I play the games. But once I had done it once, I had no desire to do it again. It just didn't feel like the old games where I could like take on a group of enemies and I don't know, make it fun, where it's not just like using big skills to take them all down at once.
Hmm.
I don't know, wasn't the same kind of experience for me. And with backstabs being nerfed in the beginning, it was really hard to deal with groups like in a higher skill way where it didn't feel like just, spacing in R1s. So I kind of lost interest pretty quick. I ended up going back and playing some Dark Souls 2, surprisingly, which that game never gets old, man. I love
Oh
that
yeah.
game. Seriously, it's the only Dark Souls game that I'll go back to anytime and have a blast. Dark Souls 1, I've played it to death. I know that game inside and out, but if I go back to it, it's like I might as well just be watching a movie I've seen 100 times. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
there's really nothing there for me. It's like it's enjoyable, kind of, but there's nothing that's gonna surprise me. There's nothing I haven't done, whether it's PvP or PvE. I've seen it all. I'm done with it, you know? Dark Souls 2, there's something about like the adventure and all the levels you go through, and even like the easy bosses. Like, I like easy bosses sometimes, you know? They're fun. That's something that I feel like is not necessarily missing in Elden Ring, but we'll get to that later.
What I wanted to add about Dark Souls
Mhm.
2, my a playthrough that I most recently have done. I haven't finished a playthrough. It's just where I'm currently at,
Yeah.
and I've been exploring around with no rolling, which is something I started doing with Elden Ring on my first playthrough. It's just a lot of the bosses that were, of course, a little bit too, simplistic in design. I wanted to spend more time with them and see their movesets.
Yeah.
And so after doing that in Elden Ring, I went to Dark Souls 2. And I was like, you know what? I mean, why don't I just do the same thing here? I understand that the hitboxes are a bit weird, but I'll adapt to them. Um, and so when I applied no rolling to Dark Souls 2, I found that I enjoyed the boss fights immensely more, and
Oh,
actually
yeah.
brought back that heartbeat that I love when I defeat a boss. I'm like, man, I don't think I've ever had this with Dark Souls 2. And so, you know, it's weird that whenever someone's like, "Oh yeah, Dark Souls 2 just has easy bosses," I'm like, "Well, have you tried not rolling?" I know it sounds weird, but it works. I don't know how well it works for most of them. I understand that some bosses are like, I don't know about that, but
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
majority of the Dark Souls vanilla bosses, applying no rolling is, I find it extremely viable. Especially, I think my favorite one was the Mirror Knight. I spent so much time on that one, but I found that the most satisfying. Just
Yeah, I love the Midnight.
it's incredible what you can find with no rolling, and I feel like
Hmm.
the Mirror Knight, it's almost like it feels almost intentional that you can get away with it, but obviously it just wasn't designed that way. But for some reason, you
That's
can.
intentional.
Oh, you think it's intentional?
Hmm. You go through every boss in Dark Souls and you look at how every attack is mechanically, how they're timed, the tracking, and all these things. They're not accidentally done, right? Every attack has its own tracking, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Vertical, like stabs and slams, right? They typically have less tracking, right? Because it's a forward singular attack. And it's meant to get you for like rolling away or running away, right? Or just being too far away in general. As to where a horizontal sweep generally doesn't track too much either because it's just getting that broad, swath in front of it. And if you're behind bosses in most, Dark Souls encounters, they'll have an attack that's specifically made for when you're behind them, right?
Mm-hmm.
To get you away. And that's how they're designed, where it's more about positioning than it is just rolling, right? Which is why no roll works so well for those games, is because it was an intentional design to make sure that your positioning mattered and not just your timing, right? As to where with Elden Ring, that's completely flipped, and they track you 360, right? Doesn't matter where you are, they'll completely turn around and whack you. And that was in Dark Souls 3 as well, but not as bad. They still had balance, and you could tell that when they did do that, it was mostly for like, PvP related stuff, humanoid attacks, and where the attacks were important, they made sure that the tracking was good. And in Elden Ring, you get a little bit of that for the most part, though. It's a dodging, simulator. Dodge, 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 or jump. And that's fine. But getting back to Dark Souls 2, like you said, no roll does help the experience. It adds depth. I did a lot of that in Elden Ring with like some of the early bosses.
Mm-hmm.
It took super simple, boring bosses, and it just opened up a whole world of depth to
Oh
where they
yes.
become some of my favorite bosses,
Mm-hmm.
seriously, by far. And then you find the ones where you can't no roll them without having to abuse a mechanic or cheat it,
Yeah.
such as like unlocking them with the weapon art, which technically you shouldn't have to use a weapon art in no roll, right?
Right.
So I don't think that those are technically no rollable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to Dark Souls 2 though, Well, it's a nice way to kind of experience those bosses. You don't even have to go that far. I mean, I guess this is going farther in some ways, but less in others. Uh, Level 1 in Dark Souls 2 isn't that hard either, right? They give you life gems, all these bright bugs and stuff, and things that'll just make you really strong, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's still difficult, but it's not like Dark Souls 3 difficult. However, they give you the COC Covenant, right? Which makes everything about twice as strong, and it makes enemies respawn indefinitely. And that's where you get like the real Dark Souls experience, right?
Yes.
That's supposed to be like the classic Dark Souls 1 experience in Dark Souls 2, which was actually tamed down to make it more of an accessible game, despite there being things like adaptability and stuff, which required adapting to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the Company of Champions alone made the experience infinitely better. Doing that as a level 1, every single boss, you get to experience them, you know? It's not like you just get to melt them real quick and it's over. Unless you, you specifically tailor yourself to be as damaging as possible. But that's something I've done in Dark Souls is not just going in there and saying, okay, can I kill a boss at level 1? Because if that was the extent of the challenge, I just used the strongest spells and stuff and go in there with everything I could to guarantee my success. But that's not really what makes a fight fun for me. It's the actual choreography of the fight itself. And I don't always put a lot of time into it. It depends on how much I like a boss, but
Right. Well.
when you go into a boss fight and you realize that you're too strong and you're going to kill it too fast, I let myself die because
Yeah.
I'm going to get a very unsatisfying fight where you'd watch it and go, well, that was over fast. What was the point? Why did you do this?
Mm-hmm.
What does it prove? Nothing. And it's not even about proving anything. It's just, it feels meaningless, right? So
Yeah.
what do? I scale myself down even further. If level 1's not enough, I'll use a weaker weapon or something that's at least fun, right? And I'll try to find like cool punishes for moves or something that just makes it seem more engaging and more like a fight. And that makes the games more fun. In Dark Souls 2, you can do a lot of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, you might be used to cheesing a boss and going around a corner, waiting for an attack and doing something, whatever. Like if you engage with the boss and engage with all the mechanics, they're a lot more fun than people give them credit for. There's a lot of ways to cheese Dark Souls 2, and a lot of people take advantage of that. But if you don't, and you really give it your all and do it, especially as a level 1 where you have low adaptability and you have to roll perfectly, it gets really deep and it's consistent too.
Yes.
More consistent than Dark Souls 3, despite it having tighter iframes. Especially with Color of the First Sin, where you get like really good frame rate. But
What's really sad going to the what I feel is the exaggerated hate about Dark Souls 2 is whenever I ask someone to explain a criticism about Dark Souls 2 is always very shallow. It doesn't really feel like
yeah,
it has any depth to it. And so
yeah,
when
it
I
does.
ask them can they explain further, usually they just link me to a YouTube video.
Yep.
I'm
I've
like,
seen good.
huh?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, how come whenever someone just has a very shallow opinion about something and then they just basically give up and just, oh, like, okay, here, they just basically reveal where they got their opinions from.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen good videos that break down Dark Souls 2 and the problems with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been surprised. I've never seen one of those videos and been like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Or, man, you're making a good point. It's just kind of confirming stuff I already get, right? It's Dark Souls 2. We've all played it. If you play it well enough, you know kind of where its flaws lie and its shortcomings. And when you first start up the game, when you first start up any game, right? It's typically blind, right? You don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
When you play Dark Souls for long enough, you already know the mechanics. You know what the stats do. You know what everything is, right? So you take it for granted. It's like all of this is good, right? Dark Souls 2 brought in a bunch of new mechanics that were not explained, that people did not understand, such as soul memory, making multiplayer a nightmare if you didn't know what you were doing. Adaptability, making dodging attacks seem awful. Like, why am I getting hit? What's going on? Does rolling not have iframes? And then it does all of a sudden. You're like, what the heck? And you're like, is it hitboxes? What is it, right? So I get why people are frustrated with it because for a blind approach, it's very jarring if
Mm-hmm.
you play Dark Souls 1 especially, right? because
Yeah.
it's like, why are we moving backwards in terms of like what's happening? Like I have no idea, right?
Well,
But
oh, sorry.
oh, okay. In the same respect, while it does do a lot of goofy little things bad, there is like 100 times more that it does better than Dark Souls 1. Just absolutely better.
Hmm.
There's so many new mechanics, so many new things to engage with, so many environmental things you can do, unique locations that have interesting things that are specific to that location, whether it's a covenant or just something interactable about that environment. And you don't get that in Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3 or Elden Ring. None of them have the level of interactivity of Dark Souls 2, where there's special hidden secrets all throughout the land, right? You get a special item for beating the game without hitting bonfires. You get a special item for beating the game, what is it, without dying. And even like killing the pigs in Majula, how it causes the larger ones to spawn after you take them all out, and then the largest one, right? Just little secrets like that are hidden throughout the entire game. If you kill, what is his name? The samurai boss. It's been that long. Um, in the DLC, you kill him without taking a hit. He kills himself. He stabs himself. You don't get that kind of stuff in the other games.
Oh,
Like
Sir
where there's,
Alone.
yeah, Sir Alone. Yeah,
Yeah, you do make a good point because see the secrets in Eldering. Yeah, Eldering obviously has secrets, but they're not really that memorable. At least in my
there's
opinion.
yeah,
Um,
the most secret thing you'll get is like a locational secret, but it's something
yeah,
that eventually everyone's gonna find. But Dark Souls 2, there's things that you won't find unless you do something very specific, and that's
yeah.
not the case really in Elden Ring. Unless you're talking about like quest lines and stuff, but let's be honest, most people are going to actively seek how to finish that, like with the internet
And
because it's for achievements.
man, as big as Elden Ring is, I am very surprised how very little of those little fine secrets that Dark Souls 2 had wasn't in there. Um,
Yeah.
and before the game came out, I was like, if the game's going to have spirit summons, I think they should have other, um, possibilities in terms of puzzle solving. And when the entire playthrough, I didn't see anything until I found this jellyfish, and with a door, and it didn't unlock until I summoned a jellyfish, and that's what I
Yeah.
wanted. But that was I don't know if there's anything else like that because it's just not scattered throughout the game, and I just wish that they would have applied more of that. That way, I could actually use spirit summons because obviously I don't use them in combat, but
Yeah.
it would have been a lot more fun and more intriguing if I could like just keep some on hand just in case I run into a puzzle that I got to figure out what spirit I need to open up this door and stuff like that. Just would have been nice, but it's just a severe lack of.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point. Just like having interactivity with the summons, right? Like the one, that was a nice surprise. I like the jellyfish thing. It was really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing else like that as far as the summons go.
Yeah, it's just there's a lot of almosts in Elden Ring. I always like to
Yeah.
quote. I don't know if you've seen that movie Apocalypto, and
Mm.
the one of the villains names the protagonist almost because he almost got away.
Yeah.
And that's what I like to view Elden Ring as is just kind of almost. It's almost amazing with its aspects, but it's just kind of they give you a
Yeah.
little bit and then they just kind of I don't know. They just take it away.
Yeah. When Sekiro released, I was my hope when Sekiro released because it's a single player game, right? And it's pretty one directional. I was like, okay, this is a side project. They're gonna be coming out with something like Dark Souls, something big. They gotta
Mm-hmm.
be, right? And I had this hope in my head that it was gonna be like an amalgamation of them all the Souls games, where they take the best of it. And I was hoping it'd be something open world. And not only that, I was hoping it would have dungeons and stuff because it's something I've always wanted. Like, going back to like Oblivion, Elder Scrolls and stuff, right? You have open worlds that have dungeons and things you can find and story quests, whatever. And I was hoping they'd head a little more in that direction. And even have dungeons that are like almost impossible for your average player, right? Where it's extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And when Elden Ring got released and it, revealed and everything, it was being pretty much that. It was almost that to a T from appearances, right? But once I got my hand on the game, it was nowhere near what I was hoping it was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is there to do in the game? Kill stuff, talk to pretty shallow NPCs, honestly. Like everything is just focused around this one overarching goal in the game. Like there's nothing outside of that, right? Like everything focuses on the Elden Ring. Like that's it. There's no like little subplots going on that are interesting other than things that also tie into that, right? It just
Hmm.
doesn't feel like a real world at all. And I feel like Dark Souls 2 even did better at that because at least it had Majula, it had a little town and people that felt like people just in the world with their own little practices and professions,
What's
their
your?
own.
Oh, sorry.
Hmm? What were you gonna ask?
Oh, I was wondering what your thoughts are on the criticism about the Iron Key being in the air.
Oh, okay. So that even goes back to Dark Souls 1, right? Dark
Hmm.
Souls 1 has areas like where you can see another area, right? And it seems like it's so far away or it's so close, but it's not, right? It's just a distant background image, pretty much. Like it's just a,
Right.
right? And that's normal, right?
Hmm.
Um, Games, you can't expect them to make everything in scale all the time, especially if they're trying to like save on resources and time, right? Especially with development. So, Dark Souls 2 having gone through development hell, which is beyond their control, right? It is.
Hmm.
So them going through that, having something where you have to ride this long elevator to get there, right? The elevator is twofold, right? One, that's so they can load it, but two, it's also so they can give an excuse as to why the hell it's so different when you get there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like you're in a totally different place, and that's kind of cool. I loved that.
Yeah.
I loved riding this elevator, coming up and being like, "Whoa, this is different. Like this is a whole different world. What the heck?" It was sweet. I love that. Like in Dark Souls 3, when you're traveling through the land, you can see everything in the distance, everywhere you're going to be in the future from High Wall, right? From Lothric. You can see out and you can see the end of the game pretty much, right?
Hmm.
And you go down and you end up having to go through the caves, right? In the catacombs. And when you do that, you're down there and you're going through, right? You come out the other side and you can look back and see where you were, right?
Hmm.
And Dark Souls 1 and 2, you can kind of do that same thing, but obviously none of it's to scale. Like even in Dark Souls 3, like none of what you're seeing when you look back is to scale. It never was. And people put like too much value on the criticisms for Dark Souls 2 just because it did start with a really rough, Dark Souls 2 when it launched was pretty rough. Let's be honest, right? The frame rate wasn't good, nothing about it was good. The graphics were not what they were presented to be. The game was hyped up through marketing because of Bandai Namco to be something it wasn't. A whole lot of stuff happened, right?
Hmm.
And I understand why people attack it so harshly now, but like there's things that are brought up that are like hated about Dark Souls 2 where does it really affect the game? Like does that elevator when you ride it make the game bad? Do you just go, "Oh man, this elevator just no." Like while you're riding the elevator, you're like, "Oh, I wonder where I'm going to end up." You know, the first time you're playing it, right? You're like, "Where am I going? What's going to happen?" And then you end up in this fire-ish hell place that you're not expecting, right?
Hmm.
I think that's super cool. I loved it. But I feel like people become jaded and they don't really realize like that first impression effect that it has and what its intentions were for an adventure because these games are about adventure, right?
Right.
It's not just about the boss fights. They didn't make Dark Souls so that you could have some intense boss fights and that's it. There's a world, right? A lot of the fun of Dark Souls is exploring the world, it's getting ambushed, it's learning these little tricks that Miyazaki has up his sleeve, right? And they do get stale and worn out but it's still a staple of the game, right? And even just the normal mobs and NPCs and whatever, they're all important. And I feel like they're still making the normal enemies like detailed and fleshed out, which is good, but they're not like forcing the encounters like they used to. They
Hmm.
just kind of feel slapped all over the place with no real thoughtful level design. Like Elden Ring, the only real good level design would be Stormvale Castle. And I'll say kind of the capital and the sewers. The sewers I think were really good. Uh,
Oh,
the
yes.
capital, the capital's pretty good. It is pretty empty for how big it is and how expansive, and the rewards there aren't that great for what you're doing. Some of the soul rewards and upgrade materials are good, but the actual like gear you find and stuff, it's hit or miss, right?
Mhm.
So that's two good areas, and then you have the academy, right?
Mhm.
Raylucaria Academy. Now that place was really neat, really loved it. Good time. And then
It's,
you have what else? Is there anywhere else that's good?
I love Castle Sol. Or wait, Shaded Castle. That's what I really like.
Yeah, yeah. I do like that with all the poison.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now, of course,
That is one of the only good like level design areas that isn't an actual legacy dungeon, you know?
even though if it's not on the path for a build I'm making, I always make an excuse to go over there because I love it
Yeah.
so much. I'm like, I
Yep.
love the boss, I love the level
Yeah.
design. It's just, I just want it.
Everything about it is good.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun. I like the layout of it, the enemies. I love poison swamps. It's goofy, but I really love it.
Oh
And I
yeah,
don't think they do them dangerously enough. I feel like the poison swamps are always too careful.
yeah.
Like Dark
Like,
Souls 1, it was good. It was a good introduction to poison swamps. Dark Souls 2 didn't didn't really do it justice, to be honest. Poison swamps in Dark Souls 2, not very memorable.
well, let's see. They had like a poison mist area.
Yeah, it just there was nothing really that felt like I liked that you had to travel through these little tunnels to like get the loot and stuff in there, and it was okay, but I don't know, there was nothing that great about the poison in Dark Souls 2. I mean, it was cool that you had like the boss fight with Mytha, but you didn't really experience the poison if you found out about the windmill, which most people did. It was fun the first time I fought her because I didn't know about it, so I had to deal with poison, I had to prepare, and it made the fight more intense, but I don't know, for long term, there just isn't much there. Dark Souls 3, I loved Dark Souls 3 at first, man. Like I still do. I think Dark Souls 3 is awesome. The the poison, well, first off you get to the swamp, right, which is probably my favorite Dark Souls map just for its aesthetics and PvP. When you get to the swamp, you got like the crabs and everything, right? It's just I don't know, there's so much to explore, so much danger in every corner, things to find. And then you go down and you have the poison swamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have these giant towering dinosaur Godzilla looking things, right? And you got all this stuff that's like dangerous and the poison is like, you know, far, far off in the distance and you can't really see and you have to slowly trudge through it. That was better, right? I really enjoyed that. I still think that it didn't poison you enough. I feel like it should have been more dangerous. I
Mm-hmm.
feel it about all the poison swamps because it's like it doesn't really give you an incentive to use the poison moss or to plan, right? Like you do your first time instinctively because you don't know your way around, but I end up never really using those materials that often because it's like if you play it carefully, they just don't really come in handy.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a shame. And with Elden Ring, they made it a point to make the poison swamps less meaningful and to make them less hazardous, and they included them, but meaninglessly. Like you just ride Torrent and they're gone and negates
Yeah.
them. Then you have the Scarlet Rot in the underground, and it's like it's kind of okay, but it's just one big square, you know? It's like one of the most bland environments. There's nothing. There's just really lazy walls all around the outside and a little bit of random stuff splashed in between. And it's kind of a shame. I just feel like now that's where Castle Soul or what is it?
A shaded castle.
Shaded Castle. That's where that was good. That was the best poison environment in there, but it's still the poison itself wasn't strong enough. It was just kind of like, oh, it's here, you know, but it didn't really interact with the enemies in a way where I was like, this is dangerous, you know. It never was the life or death, you know. There
Yeah.
was always somewhere to fight where I felt safe,
I don't, I
which
don't,
is good.
I don't know if you can tell, but I love Commander Nile.
Yeah,
But I really wish the castle was better. The castle is like it's half good and half really bad. And I'm just like,
yeah,
man, I just wish they put a little bit more thought into the design here because it's just not quite there. But I love
yeah.
going there just for Commander Nile, even though I don't really. the only valuable thing from going into the other side of the mountaintop of the giants is just the have that cave where the smithing stone 8 is at, and that's
Yeah.
really it. But the I think I uploaded, Commander Nile. I think I uploaded him 3 times in the past month.
Oh wow.
Because I
Yeah,
just
yeah, you did.
yeah,
Level
because
55 and then the others.
yeah, I did the last one was the most recent one was the no roll, which I thought I was never going to be able to do. But then as I kept fighting him, I was like, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I feel comfortable enough to do a no roll with this guy, and it worked out so beautifully. I with those challenge runs, even if I know I'm making a mistake, I just keep going with it because the fight's just flowing
Yeah.
so well. I'm like, man, I don't want to have to restart because I don't want to interrupt this beautiful piece of art. But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, man. There's times where I've been like almost hypnotized by a fight, right? Or like
oh
I'm
yeah,
doing it and I get so engaged in it. Like one of the biggest examples was the Nameless King. When I was doing him as a level 1, like the way the dragon's wings like just went out and had all this like color and were just vibrant and the clouds parting and everything and just like the lightning, it was just so magnificent, right? And you're just like fighting that with like the HUD turned off and the lock on off and just like doing it cinematically. It was just so freaking cool, you know?
mm-hmm.
It just like felt like a fight against a dragon, you know? And then even once you defeat the dragon and you're fighting the Nameless King himself,
It's a shame that hardly anyone wants to
beautiful.
talk about these small details in the combat designs. And even I've even had scenarios where I would talk to someone that has done these challenges, but they don't ever want to talk about it for some reason. So it's also hard finding someone that actually does the challenges that want to talk about it. And then like when I come across someone like you that does actually want to discuss, I'm just wondering, what do you think is the reason why some people, most people don't want to talk about these details?
Well, there's a dark side to challenge running.
Mm.
That's why. Um, so challenge running existed before Dark Souls 3. There were people like me and some others that like did it and it was fun. But it wasn't like it is now where everybody's jumped on the bandwagon, you know. It's been popularized by bigger YouTubers and everything. So
Mm.
everyone knows about it now. It's not a secret. And in Dark Souls 3, where it kind of blew up and that's where everything took off and you had people doing level 1 New Game 7 and started no roll with Tolomeo and everything. Um, it created a community that was really good at first, right? Everybody was the thing that's fun, right, about Dark Souls is overcoming a challenge that you don't know if it's possible for you, right? And then finding out that it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
With level 1 challenges, at first, you don't necessarily know that it's possible, right? You assume it is because the mechanics work,
Yeah.
right? And they're consistent. So you go in there and you're overcoming this challenge that nobody has done, right? Or maybe few have, right? Or maybe you haven't. And that's why it's something that you want to do. And when a new game comes out like Elden Ring, you know, it's something you can do that's exciting and fun. And when Dark Souls 3 came out, people were building off of that and they were like, all right, we've done new game or we've done, new game level 1. Let's see if we can do new game 7. Is that possible, right? So people are running out there doing level 1 new game 7. It's awesome, right? And then you got Tolo and he's on stream and he's like, screw it, let's see, let's see if I can kill all the bosses no roll. Why not, right? And he does one at a time, starts finding out that this is possible, that this game is designed in a way where positioning is one of the priorities. And people kept building off of that, and eventually it climaxed. And at a certain point, people had pretty much mastered the bosses, right? And it was pretty much fighting over scraps, right? Like, oh, I can fight this boss now with no rings, plus 0 weapon, and I can fight it for 3 hours, and my fight's better because of that, right? Where it really doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't. It just got to the point where it was like petty and whatever, but it's still fun. It was still good. It was a way to get longevity out of a game that you enjoyed. So I completely endorse that, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, then we come to the problem, right? Where people are wanting clout, newer players to the game that don't actually have a passion for it, that don't play it for the same reasons. They come in there and they get that, because Dark Souls gives you this feeling of accomplishment, right? Like, I did that. That's really good, and you feel good about yourself and you keep doing it and it keeps building and you get better and better and better and it keeps building that feeling. And a lot of people, it builds their egos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get to this point where it's like, I think I'm even better than everybody else, right? So you start doing these other challenges, and I've seen it with a lot of people. and they get this ego built up and they start doing these challenges and everything. And maybe they suck at it, right? Because a lot of people aren't able to do what the big challenge runners do, right? It's not something everybody can do without extreme dedication, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they find this out, and that's where we come to this, right? Cheat engine. And cheat engine has been abused and used a lot. It drove all the big challenge runners at the time away to where they don't even get involved anymore because their intense hard work is being replaced with people that just go in there, automatically upload the gear that they want. They get everything that they want, all the bonfires unlocked. They jump straight to New Game 7. They turn on God mode and they sit there and fight a boss for 3 hours until they have it completely mastered because they know everything, and then they kill it. And then they go, oh yeah, man, my kill is better because I was able to find this out in the comfort of God mode. Like, there's no value in that from the perspective of people that genuinely challenge run, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that scene took over, and it took over the Discord that was housing all the challenge runners, right? And it became accepted because people are like, well, if we didn't allow cheat engine, then you wouldn't have people like me doing challenge running, so you should be grateful for it. Well, no, because it completely destroys all the hard work of the people that were doing it legitimately. And imagine somebody that's doing it like newly in a Elden Ring, for example. You get a new game, and you're going trying to do these things that are potentially impossible, and somebody goes and just steals that from you, right? That ability, and they go and cheat engine New Game 7 and then knock it out, right? And it's like, oh yeah, okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So they're now the world's first at doing something that they stole, and that is what happened with Elden Ring. It happened massively, and it's been happening before that, and that's why challenge running just kind of died. That and Sekiro, but that's a different thing. Because in Sekiro, you weren't able to sprint without rolling. It automatically gave you iframes every time you dashed. So that was a whole different thing. But between that and the cheat engine community and just the general toxicity, it drove real challenge runners out of the scene. The remnants of them, they're lingering. They still kind of play here and there, but most of them don't. And I don't blame them, to be honest. It's just like the satisfaction's gone. The new like Elden Ring isn't. It's not balanced. It's not as quality from start to finish. The moment to moment experience is dull compared to Dark Souls. It's just not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that people play it like they do in the challenge run community is because they can cheat themselves there, right? If they want to go to New Game 7, they're there, right? They want to go to a boss, they're there. They don't have to do any of the experience that's dull and miserable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that justifies the game. So they go fight Melania, and now you don't even just have to go into God mode. You can turn on hitboxes. You can see the yellow hitboxes that an enemy has and that you have with all of your attacks. So you know exactly where it's safe. You know exactly where it's not safe. And it takes away all the guessing work. You can find the meta movements within a couple hours for something like Melania, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened with Melania. Is Mr. Borked. He is the one that uploaded this video that has over 1 million views, right? And it's him. Well, so there's another private video from their Discord, and it has him going and fighting the boss with the hitboxes on. And that's how he found the Melania dodge, where you just roll through it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how it was discovered. Before that, there wasn't a way to roll through it, right? I had theorized maybe you could get close to her and roll past it at that closest distance, but after like countless times of doing it and just having it not work, right? I was like, it's not worth it. I got to move on and do something else, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to waste that much time, especially streaming, fighting a boss and just testing something that doesn't seem to work, that clearly isn't balanced, right? But with the help of hitboxes and God mode, is able to deduce how to do it because, the answer's right there in your face. And yeah, uploaded it. And what that did is it told the entire world that that move is acceptable and that you can dodge it. And here's how to do it. So then you get these people watching this YouTube video. They learn how to dodge Millennia's waterfowl dance. And in the eyes of the public and in the eyes of From Software, that move is valid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the whole world knows how to do it. It wasn't that tricky. The whole world figured it out. No, nobody figured it out. Not a single goddamn person did. They used Cheat Engine and unveiled it to the world. When one person makes a discovery like that and the world catches on, nobody has to go through the challenge of actually discovering that thing, right? Who would have sat there and fought Melania and put themselves up against that and learned how to do that naturally? Who would have done it? Somebody who had already put a ton of time in, had already beaten Melania, and was really into the boss and really liked her, which is
Mm-hmm.
possible, and it would have happened eventually, but it happened way, way sooner. And what that does is it strips the challenge run community of that incentive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what's the incentive of me going through New Game 7 when they're just going to beat me to it using Cheat Engine and unveil everything? And then anything I do, no matter how original it is, it's just going to be, oh, well, you copied this strat, or oh, it's kind of like this, but you didn't do this, or you didn't do that. And it just, like, what's the point, right? I do it for my own enjoyment, so I do it anyways. I still do my level 1 New Game 7 kills and stuff, but it takes away that, like, drive, that desire to, like, do it as, like, a new experience. It's really exciting when you do it that way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty much gone, and it's kind of killed it for a lot of challenge runners because it's like what they're up against isn't challenge runners, it's cloud chasing cowards who are just going to steal it through illegitimate means.
And unfortunately, this has been happening for a long time with arcade machines. I don't know if you've seen the movie King of
Oh yeah.
Kongs with Billy Mitchell. He's that man's still under fire, and he's suing people any chance he gets.
Yeah.
Whenever they say that he cheated, and there's plenty of evidence that he did. Board switching, photos, and everything. And in the movie King of Kongs, you feel so bad for the guy that's trying to compete against Billy Mitchell because he's spending countless hours, going through midnight runs of playing Donkey Kong and trying to get this high score. When you got this guy over here, they'll just simply switch boards or use an emulator to get the highest score and then claim it as real because people just trust him. They believe he's a nice guy when he's just truly just absolutely evil in terms of
Yep.
just cheating and man, that's just I don't the thing is, cheaters in the end, there's really, unfortunately, I don't really think there's anything you could do, and I just don't want to be that
No, there's
guy.
not.
I don't want to be that guy that's spending countless hours trying to make something work when I'm outmatched when it comes to cheaters, and so
Yep.
usually when I'm faced against a challenge and it's just taking too long and I'm just not into it, then I'm like, you know what, I'd rather just do something else, and I don't feel bad about it, and
Yeah.
that's really the key. You just don't let it don't feel bad about it. It's just a video game. There are better things you could be doing, better things you could be discovering. Um,
Exactly.
like with other games, I've been exploring other games like Resident Evil 4, the upgrade, and Hogwarts Legacy.
Yeah.
When it came out,
Yeah.
I was exploring around with things that I knew people weren't exactly looking at because it was a game that's a little bit more simpler in design.
Mhm.
And I don't know how many people have been trying to do the things that I've been doing, but it's just fun, just tackling something that people are not trying to cheat for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. So it was a very like personal thing for me because it's something I've been doing long before the challenge run community was established, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
was a very personal thing to me. It's still something that I do pretty unique as far as my approach. It comes from a different place. It's not just about a lot of people will go in there with some ugly character, naked, just going in there and making a goofball out of every boss, trying to like make a meme out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like me, I make my character, I dress them so that they look like a character, right? And I engage in a fight with the boss. It's not just about killing them as efficiently as possible because I can deduce that. That's not the most difficult part. It's choreographing it and making it to where you're interacting with the fight in an interesting way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Revealing all the moves the boss has, showing all the different positionings and how they work, and not just doing the same loop over and over, and showing that this move can be approached from here and you can do this, or you can be over here and handle it this way, where it's not, the move doesn't have to be handled the same way every single time, and there's different branches and outcomes from each different way you do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So stuff like that's important to me, and with all this that's going on with like the cheating and stuff, yeah, it kind of sucked. But between that and then just like the overall design approach for Elden Ring and everything else it did, it really destroyed like games for me for a little bit where I was down about it.
Mm-hmm.
But now, after having a nice break from it and coming back and playing like some just simple chill games, I'm able to enjoy them again, because it killed that for me. It killed challenge running. It killed something that was very personal to me, completely threw it in the trash as far as I'm concerned. I just do what I do for fun now. If I fight a boss and challenge myself with it, it's because I enjoy it, right?
Yeah.
and it's good. I'm at a good place now as far as that goes, but
Yeah.
it is a bummer to look back and just see that gone, doesn't
Oh yeah.
exist anymore. It's been handed over to people that will never appreciate it.
And I find what I find healthy is I do these challenges not just I don't do it to gain a bunch of views or a bunch of attention or anything like that.
Yeah.
I do it just for the possibility for a discussion. I document it on my channel. Yeah, as you notice, I kind of do what everybody else does. I don't think anybody does the whole item descriptions or locations, and unless at least I haven't seen anyone do that yet. But that's just maybe my little difference. And
Yeah.
but I document it just so I can even recommend um, strategies to people. It's like, oh man, Commander Nile's tough. I don't know how you handle the spirit summons. I'm like, well, I mean, if you want to try my strategy and maybe you can put your own twist on it, and then you can document it and post it on YouTube. Maybe I could learn something from that as well. And I just feel like
Right.
that could be a very healthy way to continue these challenge runs. And
Yeah. You
it's
gotta kind of ignore the community that took the stage and just have fun with it on your own among friends and people that matter.
And it's also fun looking back. You document these challenges that you have done for
Oh
yourself,
yeah.
and you look back and like, man, I just that really motivates me to do it again and see if I can improve. There's always room for improvement. And there's also
Oh
some
yeah.
things where I'm not going to do that again. I don't think it's worth the time.
Yeah.
Like with the armored core, no rolling, no damage, no HUD thing from Horus Legacy. I am not doing that again. That took way
Oh
too
yeah.
much time. But I do recommend it to people if they're interested at least. But I'm like, hey, if you do want to try it, here's the way you could see that would be you couldn't do that if you didn't have the ability to throw items. If you couldn't throw items, then a no roll wouldn't be possible. It just couldn't unless the RNG is just really good, which would
Yep.
um, I think I managed to do that with like three bosses, but the third boss I did it with was just barely possible. I had to be extremely OP, and I think that's when I came to the realization where I was like, you know what, I don't think I want to keep doing this because it's really
Yeah.
thinning out right here.
The game's not designed around it.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, but it was fun finding how much how much possibility there was in terms of just not rolling in that game. I did have very frustrating moments, but when it was done, when it just came all together, it was very extremely satisfying. But I don't think I could really recommend playing all the bosses that way. Definitely not, especially with the some where it has multiple enemies, because it's just not going to work.
Right.
I really need to avoid getting into a gaming depression as much as possible. And so that
Yeah.
usually happens when I do this challenge and I want to talk to people about it, just express how I felt, what I went through, and then maybe, just talk about it in general. And usually, it's just most of the time, it's just nothing. People, people just usually just want to, how do I say it? They just show a lack of caring at all. I mean, it's not like I'm going on here saying, I'm better than everybody. People. I guess that's what people are assuming that I'm trying to do is just saying, oh, look how much better I am than everybody. But I'm not. I'm just wanted to talk about the experience and what I discovered, and want to see
Yeah.
if anybody else found this stuff, and
Yeah.
so I think that's one of the reasons why why sometimes I just get into a little gaming depression because sometimes you just kind of feel alone, and this
I
is
can get into this really good. I can explain this very well.
okay.
So, gaming is something that I'm very passionate about, right? I love it. It's a great experience. It's a way to have the adventure that this world kind of lacks sometimes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the things that I love and the things that anybody loves, right? You want to be able to share it. Like, things are great alone, but people want to share what they do, right? Especially something that they're proud of. So if you do a challenge or something and you're really excited about it, you want to share it with people. You want to be able to discuss it, have somebody else that you can relate to and talk to about these challenges and get into the details, right, that other people aren't going to know about. And that's what's kind of missing is there's not really a lot of people that are willing to do that. And I've pretty much sought out the ones that are there from like the older community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nice having them to like talk to and to share our viewpoints and find out that they're pretty much the same, especially when it comes to like Elden Ring. And when it comes to challenge runs, there's not really a lot of people that do them authentically, where they have like a passion behind it. It's usually just, oh, Elden Ring is fun or Dark Souls is fun, and I'm gonna do this challenge to prove I can do it. And it's just a challenge. It's not, there's nothing else to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it all stems from immersion. Like if we go back to the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, right? Um, I'd turn up the difficulty to the right point. I'd go through and try to like ground myself as much as possible. Like just use a sword and a shield or something and just like experience it. And obviously that's an easy game, but that mentality carries through all my games I play, right? I try to immerse myself. I'll turn off the HUD, turn off different elements, not for the sake of making it harder, being impressive, but for engrossing myself in the world, right?
Hmm.
So that I can actually experience things different. Like when I fight in a game like Dragon's Dogma or something, right? I'm fighting the enemy. I'm doing it moment to moment. I'm not thinking about, okay, this is this enemy's weakness. I'm going to go in there with this plan and exploit it. No, I'm going in there, I'm watching the animations, and I'm responding accordingly. And I do, obtain that information like how things work and how I should counter it. But I like to do things more like intuitively and like experience the fights, right? Like they're actual fights. And just been kind of streamlined into meta for a lot of the community, the challenger community, where it's all about like being as efficient as possible, doing everything perfectly to the most extreme degree of difficulty, where I don't really think that that's what it's about, Like it's fine for people to do it. I have no problem with it, but I think it's kind of missing like the core value of it and what makes it special.
Hmm. And
And it's hard to find people that share that value.
what I find really intriguing is, yeah, I mean, you could always do a challenge that's been done before just so you can personally experience it and get used to it and get
Yeah,
very comfortable with it. But I find what I really like is in creating my own challenges. And that's one thing
same,
I've
yeah.
definitely. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just the same.
Oh, but it was like with Resident Evil 4, the upgrade this year, the Ganado. When I jumped in, is sometimes you just kind of get a feeling, where you're like, something's here, but I don't know what yet. And so you're kind of experiencing the fight by default. Okay, well, how much can I do? I've been playing this game with a lot of restrictions already. Can this be done with knife only? And after exploring that one section alone, I found out that I can actually fight him in the starting cage. I don't know if you saw that video of me fighting him or not, but I call
Yeah,
it
with the knife.
the cage match. And
Yeah,
man, I spent a lot of hours, and it's one of those things where I love how frustrating it is, but it's also extremely fun. And of
yeah,
course, I had my moments where I'm like, okay, I got to put this down for a while and come back. But it never got to the point where I'm like, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm walking away from it. And believe me,
yep.
that does happen. Where I'm like, you know what,
It does.
this challenge is not worth it, and I just want to move along. And so with
Yep.
this interaction, somehow this cage match worked so well, and it took 6 stabs. Well, it was like, man, why can't they make games where it's just like this claustrophobic? I love claustrophobic level design and just claustrophobic challenges. Look at the first God of War. A lot of their challenges the unlock, I think, is after you finish the playthrough, and they were very claustrophobic. And it's not just the arena; it's just the challenge that they gave you, and I really miss stuff like that. I miss very specific challenges that I feel like the games just don't offer anymore, and they're more like, oh
No.
well, you know, we're going to give you more options is better kind of, idea is just very mainstream now. It's just a lot of people I hear. Pretty much whenever I listen to a gamer, I don't listen to many YouTube gamers. I kind of find a lot of them unbearable to listen to.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
um, and every once in a while, I hear someone say, "Well, more options the better." I'm like, I don't really see how. I feel like that when you have very specific things to challenge the player with, it gets much more. It just gets significantly better
Yeah.
because options is just gonna dilute, vision is
Yep.
gonna dilute artwork,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that's
like Sekiro is a good example of limitation and
yeah,
design, but having variety from that, right? Being able to expand upon the gameplay because of that.
and
So,
oh, sorry,
oh, I was just gonna expand upon the whole kind of mainstream thing, right? So, design philosophy is pretty much dead in video games.
mm,
Um, when games are first being created, people go in with a vision, right? They know what experience they want to create, and they build the game from the ground up around that experience, right? Down to
mm-hmm,
the engine, right? And that has been something that was an art for a long time where, every single mechanic that they would create, they would take that mechanic to the limit, whether it was Mario jumping or something, right? Like you'd make sure that every single parameter of that jump was calculated and thought about with all the different aspects of the level design, right? Where, all right, you can pull this maneuver off to get here, and it's something where you can create like really intense challenges with just the core mechanics themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where the actual environments and puzzles and stuff were thought out with these mechanics in mind. And now it's rare you'll get a AAA game that actually does that, where they really flesh out their game from the ground up with a vision in mind. It's almost zero. Like they don't do it. At this point, they use engines that are pre-established and they formulate games. They go, okay, well, I want my game to be an open world, or I want it to be a MOBA, or I want it to be a battle royale, you know, and they structure it around that. They copy pre-made mechanics and they just follow what works. They follow what sells. And there's very little outside of that, unless you get into indie games where people will make mostly like 2D platformer indie games and stuff. That's where you'll get like, or like Metroidvanias. That's where you'll get like good mechanics, and that's where you'll get good usage of the mechanics, where it actually handles them well. But in something like Elden Ring, like they do, but not nearly like they should. Like the jumping, for example. How much does jumping really come in handy other than some forced boss things where it's like, oh, you have to jump this attack. You either have to jump it or roll it, right? There's no in between. You can't just stand there. You can't get in a good position. You have to jump it. And that's pathetic. I don't like that. I like, like a tail whip attack that you can jump over or something. I think that's a good usage of jumping, or like, a puzzle in a boss fight, right? Where you actually have to jump around and get onto different platforms or something. Then there's none of that. There's literally
Yeah.
none of that in Elden Ring. They don't utilize it well. The puzzles in that game are few and far between, and they're really not puzzles, right? The only thing that you really get for puzzles is like extremely cryptic, like, oh, you have to go here and talk to this random person that's hidden as a jar, and then you have to go over to this building and do this to get these two pieces so that you can go to this elevator and press triangle to toggle to this other thing. Like, that's not good secrets. Those aren't intuitive, well-designed secrets with good design philosophy behind them. Those are extra cryptic things that are designed with this in mind, right? The entire thought process behind it is there's going to be a community that's going to work together, put these pieces together, and expose it to the world on the internet so that everyone can figure it out from Google, right? And that's fucking shit. That's garbage. That
Mm.
is not good game design. It's not good game philosophy. It's terrible, right? Back in the day, there were always things that point you to these things. Like, I think they did good with Sekiro, right? I was able to go through Platinum Sekiro within the first week release just off of the game, right? Like just what's in the game. It would lead you where you had to go. If you were thorough and you looked and you listened to everything that happened and you kept tabs on all the items you picked up and you were reading, you'd know what to do. You'd know what NPC to go to. You'd know what area to head back to. The only thing that they failed in that game with, which I got lucky fortunately, was that other ending where you had to like go to a specific location to listen in on a conversation. If it wasn't just for me playing around and fooling around in corners and stuff, looking for anything I could have missed, I wouldn't have found it.
Mm.
That one had nothing telling you to go there. It was just purely like you had to go back and backtrack and just scour everything you'd been through every single time you made story progress. And that is not good. And Elden Ring pretty much relies on that idea that you're just going to go back and scour an area over and over again because you don't know where they're going to hide those things. So theoretically, you'd have to go through and check every single location every single time you make story progress or kill a boss. And that's just unreasonable, especially in a game like Elden Ring.
Well,
It's a miracle I found what I did.
oh yes, definitely. Well, as awesome as this conversation in general is going, I figure we could go ahead and get to our questions.
Oh yeah.
We kind of already covered the hot takes, don't you think, or was there more? I know you have more,
Um,
but
yeah, I think we'll start with the other questions because they were pretty good.
okay. Well, let's get to the. I quickly jotted down the bosses I want. I'm sorry if I don't have arenas for all of these, and some of them I know one I'm not too certain on. It's just one that I saw. I was like, why not? And so The first question is what's your five hottest? Wait, sorry. Five Elden Ring enemies that should be boss fights, including an arena. Viability adjustments are allowed.
All right. So this this gets pretty weird. As far as the current game, I guess there's a lot of ways you could take current bosses and you could make more interesting arenas because clearly there's a lot of problems with the current arenas. They're not very thoughtful, especially with the dragons. They don't take advantage of the dragons very well. They're sloppy. The dragons go off on the cliff tops and then respawn.
Yeah.
It's really bad. Um, what I'd like to see as far as normal enemies as bosses, I'm gonna start it with a little more of a goofy one and then go to more serious. Um, with how many repeated bosses there are, honestly. So, say for example, the tree spirit, right? You fight it so many times. Um, Imagine you go through a cave, and at the end of it is a giant turtle. You know, who cares? Or something stupid. I'd rather see a stupid boss of just like a basic enemy than the same thing again. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's no excitement in that. There's no surprise. I'm not like, oh, cool, I get to fight this boss. This is great. This is unique. This is a new experience. It's just boring. It's meaningless, right? You could take any basic enemy and make it a dungeon boss, and I would have been happier than fighting the same boss over and over again.
Right.
Now, that little point aside, some actual enemies that I really would enjoy fighting as bosses. So, any normal any normal like military type enemy, whether it's hollows or the what do they call it? The little midgets that have like fire bombs in the wings and all that, and the claws. What are they called again?
Militias. Uh,
Yeah, the little militia.
yeah.
The vulgar militia, right? Um, Having a group of those in like an arena where maybe like the leader of them, or whether it's the hollows and you have like the leader of them like up somewhere where you have to like think of Dark Souls 3, the what is it, the ancient dragon or something, where you have to like work your way through the level to finish it off and kill it.
Mm-hmm.
But instead you could like go through like, you know, you have the boss and it has like a ranged attack or something or a bow, and you're fighting your way through the little minions and stuff in the arena, whether it's a fort or something, and you have the boss health bar, and you get to like go and fight it, and then you actually fight it one on one, and maybe it's just got like, a good chunk of health, so that way you actually have to engage with it for a little bit, and the same moves maybe, but maybe, add a few extras. And it can even summon in mobs if the enemy itself isn't enough. There are ways to deal with groups. Like, I don't think that ganks are unfair in Dark Souls if they're handled properly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that they've been kind of failing at, is making quality ganks like they used to, and like other games do. Um, 'Cause I actually really like gank fights, believe it or not. I do.
Mm-hmm.
But they're terrible in Elden Ring. There's no creativity. They don't take advantage of the level design, right? Like arenas, I can't even call them arenas. They're just literally like puzzle piece rooms that they plop together, and then they use a dead end room and they call it a boss room, right? Like, all right, this little circle room here that we could have put anything in, we're just gonna plop a boss in there, right? Call it good. And I just think that's so boring.
Yeah,
Like,
I noticed that when I first started playing Elden Ring, I was like, man, they're not doing much with these arenas. They're usually a rectangle, circle, or just kind of like a splotch. And it was funny
yeah,
because I went into the Ruin Bear fight and I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Here's something that's actually different. And then after that, I'm like, still just the same like Guardian 8 kind of looking place, but worse.
yeah. Yeah, it's like even Dark Souls 1, right? The Taurus demon. You go in there, you have stuff you can interact with, somewhere you can climb to do plunging attacks and stuff. You don't get that in Elden Ring, like at
Yeah,
all.
right. Yeah.
It's purely just you go into a room, you fight a boss, and there might be some rubble and shit in the way just to make the fight more difficult for no reason. And that's it. That's it.
Hmm.
There's nothing. The level design in Elden Ring is trash, aside from a few legacy dungeons and like a castle or two, right? Like there's really so much of that game that is just unnecessary.
Hmm.
Seriously, I would have much rather that entire game got condensed into like a Dark Souls type deal, where it's actual intricate levels. They could have done so much more with Elden Ring doing that than what it currently is. Like there's just like you go to Liurnia Lake, right? It is a literal flat expanse of water that is like 2 inches deep, that you can just run across that has no elevation changes somehow. There's buildings sunk into it. It makes no sense. It is the most illogical experience. It's absolutely impossible. And it
Yeah,
makes you wonder, how does this even exist?
a lot of areas do stretch way too long, especially the tops of the giants, including the other side, where it's just like, man,
Oh yeah.
can we cut this a little short? Because I'm not really doing anything for a very long amount of time. Um,
Yep.
Because even at the beginning of mountaintops of the giants and the beginning of the other side of the mountaintops of the giant, I'm like, what were they thinking in terms of me? Did they
They
want me
weren't.
to just ride my horse for 5 minutes?
You know what I bet you they did with Elden Ring? They created the land, right? They made the map, figured out how they wanted the landscape to be. They probably modeled the land crudely, right? Started placing primary castles and forts and stuff, and made this huge, ambitious environment, right? And then started detailing it. And then they got into crunch time and had to just start shoving stuff in there, right? And then they just put a bunch of crap in there because I've done it. I've been through a developing process of my own with games where I'm working on something and I get bored of like creating it. I'm just like, all right, I just kind of want to finish, and I'll start like throwing in things, and it's like, all right, so I've because you get to a point where you kind of use up all your good ideas. So your first levels,
Mm-hmm.
you take advantage of all the mechanics, you're doing all this stuff, but then you get to a point where you're like, okay, I don't got all this time to put into it right now. I'm losing the ambition and the joy, so I'm just gonna start slapping in mechanics, and you end up with some pretty lazy stuff. But also they were under time crunch, so they're under other things. They had you know pressures, whether it's Bandai Namco or Kadokawa, their investors. You never know. Um, but they got in a big rush clearly because most of the end game after Morgot is just, well, all of it really is just copy pasted enemies thrown all over the place with roars added, like the dragon, the Faramazula thing. He's given a big ass AoE. Everything is just AoE spam, unfair crap, ganks, um, bunch of enemies spammed all over that we've already seen but recolored. There's nothing about it that's new. Like in all the other Dark Souls games, all of them, right? There's always new enemies in every new area, right? You'll occasionally come across some that are like reskinned a little bit, but you'll always find new enemies
Mm-hmm.
with no exceptions, right? And in Elden Ring, that's not the case. Once you get past Morgot, you've seen the entire game, right? Other than a couple locations that are different. Um, Farum Azula and the Halig Tree, right? That's it though. Other than that, you've pretty much seen everything locationally. And unless you count a big snowy mountain as a location, but let's face it, it's pretty much a bunch of copy pasted rocks from earlier in the game, but with a really simple white texture over it, and then some basic assets that they spammed all over the place, like the giants, right? They just spammed assets everywhere. It's terrible. And they spammed enemies all over the place, made some of them fight each other for some chaos, made some skeletons that come out of the ground again to try to like shake things up. Like it's just really lazy, quick, fixed stuff, where they're just like, okay, we got to pump this out, let's fill it with stuff. Well, we don't have time to make new enemies, we don't have time to do this. The whole game was too ambitious. They didn't have time to make Elden Ring. They didn't do like Elden Ring is not what it was supposed to be. It's not. It's a very unfinished game, and people are that say it's a 10 out of 10 masterpiece, blah blah blah. They don't know what Elden Ring was supposed to be. They really don't because it's not what it is. It's not at all. It
Oh,
is so far from what it should be. Even just some of the stuff that was cut, the stuff between Melania and Radahn, it's not even there, and it would have been awesome.
oh,
It's a shame. We should jump back to the question that we ended up going off on a tangent for, which I'm very good at doing with Elden Ring and other
yeah.
stuff, or going on tangents.
It's very
Um,
easy to do that, definitely, especially when you're very passionate
yeah,
about something.
yeah. Every single tangent I go on has 1,000 tangents I can go on about them. It's crazy. But the five enemies that I'd like to see as bosses. So one of them is the ant riders, right? The ones that ride the ants. I'd love to see one of them as just a boss, like in its own little arena with some little ants or something, where maybe it retreats for a little bit at a certain point, and just ants come in or something. Just simple stuff. Could be in a cave or whatever.
Okay.
The arena doesn't need to be too crazy, just big enough that you can, use some distancing and deal with its long range attacks and not get cornered. And something that would be nice in this arena and in more arenas, right, would be like rocks in the middle of the room or pillars, things that you can use to put between you and the enemy for certain attacks. Like, for example, Ornstein and Smo, right? Ornstein has the long range thrust, and you can put a pillar between you and him, right? There's the one where it like homes around it and everything, but having something like that to stop attacks. And Ornstein and Smo is not a good example of one that you can't avoid, no roll, because obviously you just side sprint, but there's a lot of attacks where you can't avoid them in Elden Ring. However, if you were to put like just rocks and stuff in an arena where you can do that, it would help a lot. A good example is the Soldier of Nextella. He's got like a few pillars, right, in that arena, but they're very far apart. And to do no roll, you either have to maintain extreme distance for his flying dive attack, or you can position a pillar in between you and the boss. And I think just simple stuff like that, just having obstacles, can go a long way in an arena. Or having like a slope in an upper level and a lower level, just somewhere you can go to distance yourself and then drop down and make the boss, mess with its AI. Maybe get a plunging attack. We don't do that anymore apparently, but it's
I,
a thing.
I want to see more, motivation to use jump attacks. Like with
Yeah,
the Black Knife Assassin, when he jumps and he's about to strike you, you can actually jump and slap him right out of the air. I love that.
yeah,
I want to see more of that.
yeah.
And
Hell
if
yeah.
you miss it, then you have a chance of getting affected by AOE attack.
Yep,
So
exactly.
when
There's a
you
lot of beautiful things that could be done.
Oh yes, most definitely. There's so much potential, and whenever I look at Elden Ring, I just look at it as something greater in the future that we can see. Even maybe with the DLC, they'll expand upon stuff that we missed that we were looking for in the vanilla game, and maybe they'll add to the vanilla game, and then eventually,
Yeah,
maybe if we get an Elden Ring sequel, maybe it will just be the perfected formula of what we have right now, and
that's my hope. Yeah. I do see hope in that because Elden Ring, it had a rush development despite what they don't talk much about it, right?
mhm.
But even Miyazaki apologized in an interview. He's like, I'm sorry I didn't have as much involvement with this game. And I feel like it's because a lot of it was, Bandai Namco requiring this and that, and deadlines having to be met, and just him having involvement in other projects too, whether it's Armored Core or something else we don't know about. And it is what it is. But
He even
yeah,
made a
I think.
comment about. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I do believe that the DLC, that's where it's gonna shine because even in previous installments, they have the rough development, but then the DLC is where they can take their time, they can make good quality content, and I think we're gonna get the best content for Elden Ring in the DLC. I think it's gonna be by far the best out of all of it. I could be wrong, but I really think that's what's gonna make Elden Ring what it needs to be.
Yeah,
I don't think it's gonna fix the vanilla game though.
I'm kind of hoping it'll fill in the gaps, but that's kind of high hopes. Just kind of gaps that where Elden Ring feels empty and unfinished. But like I
Yeah.
said, that is very high hopes. They'll probably just kind of they might just do the regular thing where they just kind of give you a distant land where you teleport to. I'm really hoping they don't do that again because we just see it so often. I just really hope they can really attach to the vanilla game, make it feel more organic. And of course,
Yeah.
you can always, there's you can still make something organic, and it's always been organic when it comes to the DLCs, but it's just always just been the teleportation thing. It's just it's a kind of a it's too much of a trend in the From Software games, and I just want to see something kind of like with Radon when you defeat him, an asteroid plummets into the earth somewhere, and you go into a whole other area. I would like to see something like that because it's not your typical teleport somewhere. It's something
Yeah.
that you committed an action and then you have a consequence of that action and then you kind of just follow through with the world adjustment. And
Yeah.
isn't pretty much every DLC just a teleportation somewhere? Let's see, Dark Souls you teleport.
Yeah.
Dark
Dark
Souls
Souls
2
2,
you
they're all
yeah.
teleported.
Dark Souls 3 yeah, you teleport from the bonfires.
Yeah. And
And
then through a scrap of painting.
yeah, and
Yeah.
Bloodborne you also teleport from a tombstone.
Yeah.
So yeah, they
Yeah.
pretty much everything.
Totally random.
They really need to get away from that.
Yeah, I agree.
um, but yeah, yeah. I guess we need to get back. Sorry, We just maybe next time our next podcast we just won't have any questions. We'll just talk about stuff like this.
Yeah, yeah, because I could go on for way too long.
Yeah, this is just the beauty about From Software games. Is
Hmm.
there's just so much potential, and you want to see them extend as far as they possibly can with these great ideas that are not fully complete. You feel that I feel, and
Yeah,
it's amazing how upset people get when you have the slightest criticism about the game. They have, well, it's supposed to be like that because just From Software, I trust them and everything. I'm like, I don't trust anybody. I don't trust
no,
any developer. I put way too much trust in the developers in the past just to be burned.
yep,
So
yep,
I mean,
way too many times.
as much as I love From Software, I can't guarantee I'm going to love their. I can't. It's not guaranteed that I'm going to love
Yep,
their next game. And
yep, not
so,
at all.
and people just put too much. It's funny how people are like, oh well, developers they don't make mistakes. Like, what are you talking about? They're humans. They're going to make mistakes. There are many flaws in Elden Ring. Many that even if just many designs that I just disagree with, but it's just I ignore it and I move on. And I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of things that a lot of people just don't learn how to ignore, and they just want to complain about it all the time. But
You
it's
know, one of the
just,
main reasons why?
hmm,
It's not even from a place of bad intention. It's not like Miyazaki has some bad intentions or even wants this outcome, right? When a company gets too big, you have too many people working in a project, right? Say I have a vision for a game I want to make, right?
hmm,
My vision is perfect. I can have an incredible idea in my head that is thorough, everything connects, everything's wonderful, right? If I get one other person involved, my vision is compromised, right?
yeah,
And I'll have to work with that person. They have to interpret my vision. If they're doing work on that game, either I'm going to supervise what they're doing or I'm going to give them freedom to do what they want and I'm going to have a compromised vision, right?
yeah,
The bigger your team gets, that expands exponentially where different assets are being worked on by different people and you have different supervisors working on different things to ensure that things are connected the same way, and then you have to set up different teams to work on different bosses. Maybe one guy's not programming every single boss because you just can't, right? There's too many and you have not enough time. So you have different design philosophies going into bosses, and maybe certain things are supposed to be upheld just quality wise, but that's it, right?
hmm,
And with Elden Ring, it's too big. Like it's just too many. It's too many people involved. Even not just within From Software, but Bandai Namco, right? Like I can almost guarantee you Bandai Namco had a say in how certain things panned out, whether it was backstabs or anything, right? If something isn't visually presentable to a casual new player, they don't want it, right?
hmm,
Backstabs from the past look glitchy and stuff, especially with Dark Souls Remastered releasing. They were like, no, we can't have that because everybody complained about Dark Souls Remastered and it didn't do that well, right?
hmm.
As for Elden Ring, nobody complained about backstabs because they sucked. They didn't exist. And then they slightly worked them back in when people got used to the game.
Hmm.
It was a very deliberate thing. It was not an accident. They know what they're doing when it comes to programming their AI. And I found that to be a little frustrating, but that's what it is. I don't think it's From Software's fault. I think it's Bandai Namco.
So let's
What's
see.
another one of the questions you wanted to touch on, by the way?
Oh, did you only mention one enemy that you would like to see as a boss fight, or did you mention two already?
So I mentioned honestly, both the rider type enemies. The ant rider, I really like those enemies, just like to have them expanded on in some way. And
Hmm.
then the wolf riding lady, really like to see her as one.
Oh,
And
wolf riding lady. I don't think I must have missed her.
the one that shoots arrows, in the concealed tundra or whatever it is.
I don't. Maybe I haven't been there yet.
So it's right before the trial you go through to get to the Halig tree to fight Melania. There's literally like two of them in the entire game. And they're just there. They ride around on their wolf and shoot arrows at you and have some cool attacks on the wolf attacks as well. And it's just they're
Huh.
fun. If you had like a duo of them, and then like some archers that you had to take out, Tower Knight style from Demon Souls, that could be a really fun fight.
Okay.
It could be a lot of fun having to work through an environment, take out the archers, and then fight off the two wolf archers or something. That'd be sweet.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that enemy. I don't recall seeing them at all. All
Oh
right.
yeah, they're awesome.
All right.
There's
Was
an,
was there anything else you wanted to touch on that one?
there's one more enemy that I was thinking of. The flame chariot could have been done cool. They could have done a nice arena with a flame chariot and some mobs. And it's crazy because a lot of people would hate that I'm saying gank bosses in general, but dude, I love a good gank boss.
Oh
I think that
yes.
they're incredible
Well, what
when
do you
they're
think?
done right.
What do you think's the best trio boss in the from out of all the games? I know there's not many of them, so um, is I can't even think of one right now that's not an Elden Ring.
So you have Dark Souls 2, you have the gank squad
Uh
with,
huh.
that one was pretty good because you could use the environment to mitigate the threat and it helped a lot and it was fair in that sense. I don't think it was perfect though. One second, I'm just scrolling through this to try to find that enemy.
Well, I guess that kind of tells you that at least they weren't kind of lazily throwing a trio fight in just to see if it worked. At least they, I guess it kind of shows like, yeah, three can
Hmm,
might be a bit of a crowd in a design, so they just kind of stuck with two.
here's another one. So the champion Great Wolf, right? Grave Tender, that fight in Dark Souls 3, that was a really good gank fight. So first you have the three wolves, right? You have to kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how quickly you take them down, if you like set them up to kill them all together, you'll end up having the Grave Tender himself to fight as well, right? And then him as an enemy, he has a health threshold before the wolf spawns in, the actual boss, right? And if you can, even at New Game 7, you can DPS him down so that you don't have to fight them both together. And I like fights that are calculated like that, where even at the most extreme point, you can get by. I really like that. Where you can mitigate like I love fighting multiple enemies because fighting one enemy, it's really just the same thing, right? Like it's hard to escape what they've already done when it comes to one-on-one fights. But with ganks, that's where the future is if they really want to improve on their game, is to make good gank fights. And not just where there's two enemies that movesets correspond with each other, but where the AI works as a unit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where certain attacks can't happen when another one's attacking, or one will do an attack that sets up for the other one doing another attack, and they'll work together. Sort of like the Dark Souls 3 demons, right? The Demon Prince, that fight. That was a really good gank fight
Yeah.
where they alternated forms, one was close range, one was far, and it functioned well, right?
Mm-hmm. I
And there were never checkmates.
In terms of trio bosses, I think I had to go to Bloodborne. I had to give it to Bloodborne. I really
Oh yeah.
I love the trio fights in Bloodborne. There's the Merciless Watchers trio fight. I love that one, and of course you got the Yarnum,
Yep.
Yarnum trio.
Shadow of Yharnam or
Yeah,
something.
Shadow of Yarnum trio.
Yeah.
That's
That was a
also
really good fight.
yes. So it can work. I mean, see
Oh
a
yeah.
fight like that. Thankfully, you got a tombstone there to help divide them a little bit. But it's
Yep.
amazing how you can just see you're fighting three enemies, but it feels fair. It feels very rewarding, and
Yeah, exactly. That's a good example.
it's a frustration that's good to feel. It's like whenever I die, I'm like, ah man, let me do that again, and it's just, I love that feeling.
Like, yeah.
So I think that's really the best example I can think of, unless I'm just totally forgetting about. Oh heck, what's the name? In Dark Souls 2, there's a trio fight. What's the name? The Sentinels.
Oh yeah, that is a really well done one because they introduced them separately, and then their movesets complement each other pretty well.
And I love how the fight starts on that little platform, and you basically they're
Yeah,
like, see how long you can last on
it
here.
expands as more enemies show up, and you actually have ways of mitigating them and keeping them separate.
Those are
That's a
kind of
really good fight.
those are the basic. I look at those as the draft for the Crystallians.
The Crystallian trio is terrible.
Is it really bad? I haven't fought it yet. Fought them yet.
Such a bad fight. Yeah.
And it's the thing. I love the Crystallians. I love the duo Crystallian fight you have in the cave next to the uh, Rhea Licarius, whatever that place is called.
Yeah.
I like that duo fight with the Crystallians because you got arena obstacles in there to help split up the one that's shooting projectiles at you.
Yeah, the
Um,
duo works really well.
but the trio, yeah, I've heard some really bad things. Actually, Aldemo, a guest I had a couple times, he actually likes the Crystallion trio. I don't know how he fought them exactly. I would have to see how he fought them, so I could be like, okay.
So here's the thing with the Crystallion trio is he likes the modern Crystallion trio, not what they were, right? So ganks in Elden Ring suck. They're
Mm-hmm.
terrible, right? Um, the Crystallion trio he's talking about is not the Crystallion trio that I'm talking about. 1.0, before they patched ganks, right? The Crystallion trio was unforgivably bad, right? They all three were attacking at the same time. It was checkmates all over the place, right? One would attack in a way where you had to move a certain way, and then you were forced into another one's attack because there was no coordination, right? None. Now they just have something where AI will just shut off if you're fighting one. Like the other ones will just stand idle and wait, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a good, elegant solution. Like there's a little bit of variety in how it works, but it's not in a good way, right? And now they're just dumbed down to the point of like, yeah, it's an acceptable fight because it works and you can kill them easily, and it's a trio fight that works well, but it's not. Like that fight has so much potential if they did it right. Because even during 1.0, it was it was cool because I had to come up with my own solution to it,
Hmm.
which was working the perimeter, staying away from the mage because the mage is what created chaos, right? It was the shotgun multi-burst attack that covered a huge range, right? When it pulled that off, it's like you had to be moving and ready to dodge because that attack will get you and it'll screw you over if you're doing no hit, right?
Hmm.
And then you got the other enemies attacking at the same time. You have the one throwing rings and chasing, and you have the one chasing you down with the spear. Stab, 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 right? So what I had to do was sprint around the or around the perimeter, right? And like try to keep near the one with the spear and parry him, or just roll dodge and like jump attack or like hit him with the heavy any chance I got to try to break his armor while staying away from the ring throwing one and being ready to sprint and perpendicular jump or roll from the shotgun attack, because if you went after him first, then you were pretty much screwed because the spear one's constantly after you, right? Which isn't the case anymore because now they take turns, um, which is an improvement, I guess, but it's not the right way to do it. But they just, kind of did a blanket fix for AI when it comes to bosses, where they just applied the same template for every single boss. Pretty much just, you know, one AI shuts off when this one's attacking and the other one, you know what I mean? Which is a lazy fix, but it's better than what it was. But I don't think Crystallion Trio is a good trio boss fight. I think it had potential to be because there is the groundwork for it, but
I kind of
there's fundamental flaws in the attacks that they have and how they work together.
I think what they should have done, and this is just an idea I just thought about, they should have called it the Crystallion Trinity, where they're all back to back. They're just stuck back to back, and you just kind of choose what side you want to fight and knock out first. And while they just kind of spin around, you kind of have to adjust accordingly. I think that probably would have been cool.
That would have been really cool. That's actually a neat idea. Yeah. Sort of like Dark Souls 2 when you're fighting, oh, what is it called? The Sentinel thing? Uh, Not Sentinel. It's where it's got the front side, it's got the two spiked clubs, and then on the other side it's the two blade or two or four blades or
Oh
something.
yeah, Flexile Sentry.
That flex out, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really cool design, especially how the arena's filling up with water. Oh man, I wish we
Yeah.
had more stuff like that. Oh.
Right. Little thing, arena filling with water over time. Just another example of how Dark Souls 2 does original things. You
Mm-hmm.
you can I just saw a video where I forget who it was. They go on about like all the stuff that's just in Dark Souls 2. They didn't even cover half of it, and they were trying to be thorough. Like there's so much. So here's something in Dark Souls 2, there's nothing like about this on the internet, okay? You can literally play without having to worry about souls whatsoever. Like you cannot lose your souls if you play this way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So once you unlock the tree in the DLC, you can go to it and you can whip it with that thorned whip, right?
Uh-huh.
People know about that and it repairs your gear, right? But it doesn't just repair your gear, it fully repairs your gear, right? And it's like, okay, that's cool, but how expensive is it really to repair gear? Do I really care? Do I want to make a trip there? Well, if you wear the ring that prevents you from losing souls and you're grinding through the game or whatever, right? You keep that ring on, and if you die, you teleport to the, you'll usually get like 2 rings in your first run. You die, you put on the other ring, you die, you go to the tree, you whip it, and then boom, both your rings are back. You didn't have to spend 15,000 souls to repair your ring, and you have all your souls, and you don't even have a chance to lose them because you don't drop your souls, right? And
Mhm.
all your gear's repaired. And you just go right back to playing the game. Instead of going, oh crap, I lost my souls, now I gotta go back and get them. No, you don't. You just do that. And that's something unique to Dark Souls 2, where every mechanic within the game that people complained about, you could completely mitigate it. You could earn a way to mitigate that mechanic, including losing souls. But nobody talks about that. Like, there's nothing
Jeez.
out there that's like, oh yeah, you can do this, but you can completely remove that mechanic, which is so cool. You
Yeah.
can make it so that you can just freely go around and do whatever, and you can kill off all the enemies in the game. You can make it a world of peace, you know,
Hmm.
whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I know some people on Facebook, and they're always saying stuff like, "Ah, Dark Souls 2 sucks." I'm like, "Well, why?" "Well, the boss fights are too easy." I'm like, "Why don't you use a weaker weapon?" And then they're like, "Boss fights are too easy." I'm like, "I just told you. I mean, why don't you just use a weaker weapon? Just use a slightly weaker weapon." They're like, "Well, the
Yeah.
bosses are too easy." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, man, why do you keep looping? Why aren't you advancing this conversation?" "Well, the boss fights are just too." I'm like, "Are you just messing with me, or do you really think this?" I mean,
No, it comes from a place of ignorance and then ego, right? Like when people have a stance, they don't want to be wrong, right?
yeah.
And then when you find out you're wrong, they try to snake their way out of it, right? Or like find a middle ground. Well, it's kind of both, it's a little bit of both. It's still bad, but there's good things to be had from
Oh,
it. And that's kind of where people end up coming is like, Dark Souls 2 is okay. It's good in some ways, bad mostly.
uh,
No, it's actually just really good. The people that enjoy Dark Souls 2 are the people that actually play Dark Souls to play Dark Souls and
mm-hmm.
not because it's just a ego building clout game where it's a hard game. I can beat it because I'm a fucking gamer. I play Apex Legends. No, you're not a fucking gamer. You're, anyways.
uh, yeah,
Yeah.
man, yeah. I'll run a poll, and God forbid, give people two choices. Because I'll say, "Oh, what do you like more, Slave Knight Gale or Dark Eater Mitter?" And they're like, "Oh, well, I like both bosses." I'm like, "Okay, well, which one do you like better?" "Well, I mean, they're both great bosses." I'm like, "Yeah, but there's got to be, you got to have a balancing trick, here. Which one has the most positives? Which one have the most negatives? Just balance it out. Yes, I understand that they're great bosses, but one has got to have something better than the other that you prefer." You're like, well, you just like I said, they just go through a whole loop, and you just never get anything valuable out of them conversation wise.
Yep. Dark Eater Midir. So that fight, really good. It's one of the most consistent bosses in Souls history. It's incredibly readable. As long as you fight them head on and you don't run underneath them, it's a really cinematic, beautiful fight. Really consistent. I could go in there right now and first try it. You know what I mean? With extreme conditions, I could first try it. Why? Because it's an extremely consistent fight.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make it the best? No, but I think it's a very, very good dragon fight. It's one of their better ones and out of the series, right? I think Elden Ring actually improved on dragon fights, which might surprise you, but in a lot of ways they did. In terms of like the generic dragons, they're very good. But they give you too strong a tools in Elden Ring to just decimate the dragons. And then they get really sloppy with the dragons with like the Kaled one that has awful mechanics and the Frost one that has awful mechanics. So it's like where they did improve, they also went 10 steps back. But
Yeah, I love Dark Eater Mitter. I think he's
yeah,
close to Nameless
he's incredible.
King, in terms of my favorite boss fights in general. But his arena, I feel like his arena is way too small.
Yeah, it's too easy. Well, I don't know if I'd say it's too small because something that I do like about the fight is having to pay minor attention to like, okay, am I backing myself into the wall? Do I need to readjust or do I need to get underneath him and get past him so he can
Mm-hmm.
turn around? And I think for longer extended fights, that actually adds a dynamic that if you make the arena too big, you're not going to phase. And it's one of the more interesting parts about the fight that makes it more than just like super predictable. It's actually
Yeah.
one of the only things that adds difficulty to the fight, even for me at this point. Like, I think it's good the size it is, to be honest.
Well,
But
I'm
that is
just,
subjective.
yeah. Well, I'm
Comes
speaking.
from what you're aiming for, yeah.
Well, see, I haven't fought him in years, in my opinion, for a lot of bosses have probably changed. I don't. I see. As for right now, I've never liked Slave Knight Gale because the beginning of the fight I just found really boring. Because I mean,
Yeah.
the last part of his fight is incredible. I mean, the best that we've seen in boss fights in general. But his first phase, I just find an absolute bore to go through. It's kind of how I feel with Melania because I feel like her first phase is extremely
Yeah.
boring, and then you got this incredible second phase that I would much rather see and experience. But
So it's not even that it's boring because the first phases are like really good and engaging, but they're too long, right?
yeah,
Like you rinse and repeat the same moves over and over because of how massive the health pool is. And by the time you get through it, you have to learn a whole new phase, right? And it's like you got to get through that first phase every time you want to fight the second phase. So if you're
yeah,
doing it as a challenge run, it just makes it tedious,
hmm,
right? It's so tedious. Like they do not need that much health in phase one. They don't
right.
need that much health in general in some cases.
Well,
It's
look,
like Gale, I love phase one. I love doing that fight with no HUD, no lock on phase one, and just seeing the spectacle of it and the movement. It's like a dance of blades, right? But it's too long.
yeah,
Like by the time you get to phase two, you're like, oh my God, that was like it's boring to watch because it's fun at first, and then you're watching the same thing for like 2, 3 minutes, and then you finally get to the actual fight, and then it starts to get good again. And then even then, it's like phase two for a while, and you're doing that whole song and dance, and then finally you get phase three where the real stuff kicks in. And
one,
it takes too long, even with like Frida and everything. Like that second phase is too long.
yeah, you're definitely right about that. The second phase of Sister Freed, yeah, it does drag.
Yeah.
And another weird thing with the boss fight, Fire Giant. I really love the Fire Giant. I know you feel differently about him, but
I
um,
don't hate him.
every second with the Fire Giant, I absolutely love. I love fighting him every time, just doing a no damage run. I think I could just do that every playthrough because it's just I enjoyed nearly every aspect, and it's like the whole fight feels like an adventure to me within itself. However,
Hmm.
when I get footage for him, it's usually about 5 minutes long, and it's pretty much the only time where I'm like, you know what, I don't want to watch myself do this. I rather experience it. So whenever I upload it, it's very rare that I'll just rewatch it because it's more boring watching, and it's really fun playing, but it's really boring watching myself do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it's not the same with like Commander Nile. I love watching every single thing I do in Commander Nile because everything I do is very deliberate and it's it's also not 5 minutes long. I see the biggest problem I have with the Fire Giant is just the last little bit of the Fire Giant drags too much. He just gets extremely tanky. Um, I feel like there's definitely a balancing issue in terms of phases. I feel like his first phase should
Yeah.
be longer, second phase should be longer than his third. Everything else should have like the same length in terms of health, and for some reason it just feels it's so off. I don't know why they decided to do that because as crazy as this third phase is, I think it definitely needs to be significantly shorter because you'll see the same motions several times,
Yeah.
and he loves spamming the roll. He loves spamming. I don't know if you watched my entire recent upload of the Fire Giant, but he spams that fireball cast so many times.
Oh yeah. It's obnoxious. I'll have to watch your most recent one. I don't know if I've seen it. I probably thought it was the same one because when you said you uploaded three, I was like, oh, okay.
Oh no, I uploaded
No,
three.
that was the Commander Neil,
Yeah,
not
Commander
Fire Giant. I did
Neil.
watch your Fire Giant kill.
Yeah, you were there live, remember?
Yeah,
But
yeah, that was good.
yeah, here.
So Neil, I think there's a solution for Neil to make him better. That's not quite what people would expect because I really like the intro of that fight. I like going in there, taking out the one, and then taking out the other,
Mm-hmm.
and then fighting him, right? But I actually like the premise behind the other Commander Neil that you fight in Kaled more,
Oh, really?
where he doesn't just summon once, he summons twice, right? Or was it three times? I think it's twice. But I would like him to summon more, right? It's like a primary mechanic of his. Have him get to like half health or something, give him less health, but have him get to half and then go back into like summoning mode. Summon some more interesting enemies that suit each other well, have him go more passive, and just have another thing to break up the fight and make it more interesting so you're not just fighting the same thing for a majority of his fight where he doesn't have that many moves.
I feel like Renala to make her better. I mean, I don't know why they decide to make her aggressive while the spirit summons are going after you. Because you're having to focus on so much, and while you're trying to deal with the spirit summons, I mean, really the only proper solution is just they'll keep running away until they disappear. And if you try to fight them, then she'll just shoot you with something off screen. And I was thinking about the other day about maybe a solution, but it probably wouldn't be very popular. Is that whenever she summons a spirit summon, an arena is also summoned as well, and she'll disappear, and then you get to fight the boss. Just a small temporary fight, and you can either wait it out or you can just fight the boss and make go away a lot faster. And then whenever you defeat the boss, she'll have like a little slight stagger moment, something like that. I think will be a lot more interesting. And
Yeah.
now that
Chance to hurt her after.
do I know.
A chance to hurt her after you win the fight.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if you have to increase her health pool, I mean, go ahead and do that just so you can have a more interesting fight. And also, once you get through the first phase, that whole gimmick, get rid of
Yeah.
it so that we can jump right into the main fight. Because we don't. Why in the world do we have to do that every single time? Because it's always the same thing, except
So
there are different locations to where you have to hit the children or whatever.
I actually phase 1 is really interesting on like level 1 new game 7 no hit. If you're not using like meta high damage stuff.
Uh huh.
If you have to like two phaser at least, it's pretty interesting honestly. Like there's a lot of dynamics to that fight, and I really do enjoy phase 1. Phase 2, okay? Here's the problems with phase 2. First off, it's the fact that she can back to back to back summon. Second, it's the way her AoE gives her hyper armor for summoning and how much range it has. It becomes a situation where it takes away a lot of your ability to punish or do anything because she can just pull that out of her pocket, right? And so you were saying, okay, she can attack during the summons, but there's actually like somewhat solid mechanics behind it. So when she summons the Bloodhound Knight, she does not attack, unless you go after her, or if you attack the Bloodhound Knight. And here's why, right? So the Bloodhound Knight, you think, okay, well I'm just gonna run away because it's my best shot, but actually, it's not. It actually takes a really long time if you run away, and he can outrun you and he can
Yeah.
outstep you, so that he can actually hit you while you're sprinting. You cannot just sprint away from him and get away. He will outrun you. But if you hit him once, literally once, and then you just get away from him, he'll despawn. That's all it takes, one hit.
Oh, really? Just
And
one?
that just one. You just smack him once, and then you dodge his attack, and then he just despawns. You go after her and start fighting her.
Okay.
So that's
Huh.
yeah, so that's good. So I'm like, okay, that's cool. And the wolves, it's the same kind of deal where they can despawn, but if they don't, they take one or two smacks to kill, right? It's no big deal. And she does get involved there, but they're pretty easy to backpedal and just take a swing at, and they can't do anything to you, right?
Hmm.
They're harmless. So you could say, all right, that's kind of fine. The giant, she does attack during the giant, and I think the giant's pretty bad, but at least the giant's slow and it despawns pretty quick. So is what it is. The dragon, she doesn't attack you at all. Um, However, if you promote the dragon to like do longer combos and stay for longer, she will. And if you attack her during the dragon, she'll attack back. The best way to get rid of the dragon quickly is to force it to fly up and land on you at the beginning. And then or it breathes fire no matter what first, right? And if you're far away, it'll fly up and drop. And you can use that as an opportunity um, to like get close to her while it's doing the flying attack. Like you put it between you and her so that way you're close enough that you can punish her after. And it works. But if you're too close to the dragon and you try engaging with the dragon or her, it can continue on and do longer combos and stay in the fight longer than it should.
Hmm.
And I think that's pretty good. Like I think that the mechanics around the spirit summons are good in terms of that, but where she falls apart is the fact that she can spam summon them, and it is her primary goal is to summon shit. Like when you get to phase 2, you will get summon spammed. It is a fact. Like it's going to happen, and she's not gonna stop. It's very rare that you can get her in a loop where she's not gonna break it up to summon, right?
Hmm.
It's extremely rare. It is a very small percentage of the time that you're gonna get a fight where she's not gonna summon for like a good combo, you know? It's
Gotcha.
always gonna happen, and it's obnoxious. And when she does it, you are then not able to attack her unless it's like the wolves. You can run away from the wolves, you can attack her, or you can hit the Bloodhound Knight and you can run in, but then you're subject to her mechanics, right? So she can turn into the moon and thrust that at you, and you're unable to attack her while she's doing that, and then you have to run away from that, and you have to hope that you have decent RNG and that she doesn't summon, and it's just a big stalling fight. Renala's terrible. It's
Mm.
literally one of the worst fights in Elden Ring, because she will just stall and stall and stall, summon, cast things that you have to like run around and wait for, and eventually get to her if you even can at all. And there's ways to like really get up in there and punish the shit out of her, but it's
Yeah,
not good, man.
that's why I'm
There's so much
finding.
wrong.
That's why I'm trying to force a lot more entertainment out of Radon because I would much rather go to Radon instead of the
Yeah,
Red Wolf, Radagon, Renala route because
yeah.
I found I've been most recently practicing around with Radon. I'm finding more openings, so I'm finding him a little bit better as a fight because I really didn't really care for him at first. I was like, ah man, this is kind of overhyped, and then
Yeah.
recently as after playing around with him a little bit more, I'm like, you know what, it's actually not that bad. It's still not my favorite, but it's just.
Yeah, I
But
found something cool about Radahn. It's kind of cheap, but I like it. So if you just run away from Radahn, like right off rip, he just loses tracking on you, and he just stops targeting you.
Yeah, someone actually mentioned. I was listening to a video and someone mentioned that. I was like, oh wow! So I tried it the other day, and but I don't know. Does it take longer to do that than just run up to him?
No, so check this out. Not only is it somewhat faster, but it's more consistent, and you get straight into melee phase. So what I would do once I found that out is I turned around 180 degrees from them and sprinted away from them. And there's conveniently placed some weapons in the ground, right? Like you know how you can take cover behind them,
Uh huh.
just far enough away that if you sprint directly to it, you can hide behind it. And then he immediately loses tracking from you, right? And it goes into a melee fight where once you approach him, he'll charge you with his melee, right? To me, that tells me that From Software was preparing for like a no roll type strat, right? Because they do that. Like in the previous games, when you look at the way the fights are calculated and set up, it looks like they intended every single move that they make to be outmaneuverable with just movement,
Hmm.
right? Which is how it should be. And
Yeah.
Radahn does that, right? And you can do that. You break you break that, then you sprint, and you get to just have a melee fight with them. And the actual fight itself is pretty good. 1.0, it was not. There were serious flaws with it 1.0. The orbs will all fire off in a way to where you couldn't avoid them all properly, and they fired off instantly. And he had way more health. Everything about the fight was just miserable. It's a lot better now, but it's almost too easy now, like in terms of him just being kind of squishy and easy to burst down, which was a shame.
Well,
But
why do you think they patched him but not the other bosses?
so Radon and Melania were given the spotlight during all the trailers and stuff, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
those were the bosses. Those were the ones that people were gonna fight that were gonna be epic as shit. Like you saw Radon and Melania fighting, and you're like, I can't wait to fight them, right? And you get to Radon, and he's this goofy ass, no-legged dude riding on top of some crippled horse, right? And it just looks cartoonish, right? It doesn't even, it's kind of cool, but it's also like a joke, right? It just feels like a joke. And it's like, that's the fight, right? And you got Melania, who just, you know, she was the pinnacle of difficulty in the game, right? And because cheat engine's a thing, people found out how to counter all of her stuff right away. So she was never really like you don't want to nerf the biggest fight in the game, right? Because then it takes away the challenge, and they do get that, but they did it anyways to a whole bunch of other parts of the game. And Radon's kind of a victim of that. Same with like a Stallion Trio or any gang fight for that matter. Um, Radon got nerfed and he shouldn't have. It's just that you can access him so early in the game because he's basically like at the same point as Renala, you know?
Mm-hmm.
He's like a second remembrance boss that you would fight. It's either him or Renala. And because he's so much stronger than Renala, they nerfed him down to the difficulty of Renala. And I don't think that was a good move.
Hmm.
Um, I think he should have still been on the level of like Melania, to be honest.
That sucks.
And Melania should have been brought down.
I really think he's got also a health balancing issue, a phase health balancing issue where his last phase is way too short. I think it could
Yep.
have been increased a little bit
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
when I feel like I
Go
have
ahead.
to reduce my attack so much at the very end because I feel like because he leaves a lot of openings, including after he lands for the meteor attack.
Yeah,
And by the
yeah, you
time
can
you
force
wail on
them
him
down
on
too
that,
fast.
the fight's almost
Yeah,
over with. He's got like maybe two
yep,
or three hits. I mean, just like I said, I got to reduce my attack damage sometimes just so I can like make it last longer.
yep. Had to do that for my New Game 7 fight even. It's still I was doing too much damage.
Well, um, so we need to start wrapping it up. Actually,
Yeah, we do.
man, I love this conversation, but man,
Yeah,
um,
same. We'll have more.
let me go ahead and list just a few. I wrote down five, but I don't really care about some of these. Plus, you mentioned one that was actually on my list, like the Chariot. I feel like the Chariot would make a great boss fight if
Yeah.
done correctly. Um, so I'm gonna remove the other one, which was Finger Creeper, because I don't really have anything good to mention in terms of that. It's just something I threw
It
in.
could like drop off a ceiling, and as you fight it, it could go back up to the ceiling and
Maybe
like
just
have a mechanic like that, sort of like Ludwig or something.
Yeah, maybe fighting a humongous one, like the biggest one, and have like really cool moves with the fingers. I think might be pretty cool.
Right, like a master hand type fight, or like
Yeah, yeah, Master Hand.
yeah.
All right, so the real quick, feel free to interject.
Okay.
So my first one's Fire Prelate. Of course, he's the one that looks like
Yeah.
Smo. He is absolutely fantastic. The arena that I have in mind is the arena he's actually already in, called it's in
Yeah.
Fort Lade, next to the Volcano Manor. I think that
Yep.
that place. I think that whole place was
Should have been
designed.
a boss fight. Yeah,
Yes,
I
definitely.
agree.
I feel like that arena was actually designed just for him, but unfortunately,
Yeah.
it's got one of those flaws, like sort of like the Ludwig, where you got the steps that kind of messes up with the boss's move set. And so
Yeah.
the same issue here, because he's got this charging attack that would be really cool if he could continue it going up the stairs, but he gets cut off. And so I don't know if you saw my video of me fighting him. I think I reduced
Yep.
myself down to where I'm fighting him for like 2 minutes, and the whole thing, yeah, I just with the restrictions with no rolling made it really fun, and definitely a very underrated moment in Elden Ring that not a whole lot of people are going to look at. They're just going to walk in there, kill him in like 2 or 3 hits. It's such a
I'll
shame.
do that next. I'll do that next. I'll go fight him next. That'll
Oh
be the
man,
next
please
part of
do.
doing my thing.
I want to see it.
I'm gonna reduce it down until it's about 2 minutes.
Nice. Yes, because I want to see how you approach it. So yeah, Fire
Yeah,
Prelate.
I will watch your video. I'm gonna try to do my own strategy and see how it compares, and now I can see like what you did that I didn't, and vice versa.
Okay.
That'll be really cool.
You might find more openings than I did because I mean, like I only spent maybe a few hours analyzing it,
Yeah, yeah.
but
And I have way too much experience with this stuff, so
so my second one is the crayfish. Not a whole lot of people talk
I
about
knew that was coming.
not a whole lot of people talk about the crayfish, and they're extremely powerful, very aggressive enemies, and
Yeah, they're
my
scary.
they're very scary, and
Yeah.
I'm surprised that I didn't know they could actually stagger and you can get a repause on them, but of course it makes sense in Elden Ring. But do what?
Oh, I just said yep.
And so what was one thing I was going? There was I totally forgot. But anyway, crayfish in the sewers. That one spot where you have those um, little pieces of pipe laying on the ground. I feel like that would be a great arena for a crayfish. But if the crayfish was a little bit faster, maybe I don't know. There would have to be some kind of necessary
Yeah.
adjustments so where you just couldn't just simply spam them to death and of course, like I said, there would have to be necessary adjustments so you couldn't just simply overpower them. It would be actually be a beautiful piece of art in terms of just the fight in general. And so my next one is the Lion and Guardian duo, and that's at the Castle
Oh,
Saul.
I meant to tell. All right, that was one on my list. It's the big lion with the claws on the arm.
Okay, yeah,
That is
Lion.
one that I wanted to mention. That needs to be a boss.
Yeah,
It's so good. Like it confuses me how that's not a boss.
exactly. When I first started playing Elden Ring, I'm like, man, when's the boss version of this enemy gonna show up? And it never did. I'm like, what? And then I get to Castle
Yeah,
Saul, and I see this,
you
you
fight
know,
two,
yeah, like you get fight two of them. And it's very similar to Lud and
and they do
Zalin.
it. Blood and Zelen. Yep,
Yeah,
exactly.
even the one of them is even sleeping like Lud and Zalin.
Yep.
I'm like,
And I
man,
love that. I thought that was an awesome nod to Dark Souls 2. But
yes,
they didn't make it a boss fight. Like,
yeah.
why not? Just throw some health bars on there, man. Please.
Maybe
I would have loved that.
maybe a different arena. Maybe not necessarily Castle Saul. I think because I think I had too many.
Yeah. And it's too cheesable with that door right there.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, hopefully it would be blocked off if it was an actual
Right,
boss fight.
fog wall. Yeah.
But yeah, I would change the arena. I don't know exactly
Dude,
where.
honestly, Honestly, that arena would be sick. So, you know how there's that balcony that you can go up
Uh-huh.
and it like takes you to the upper floor? If you fog wall after the balcony where it goes to kind of that street where there's the building on the left, like if you just fog wall there and you have the upper floor and then you have the bottom area, like you have a good boss arena because you have places you can go where you can kind of like mitigate the two of them. You can get one of them trapped. You could go up to the top and kind of use that range to your advantage and they can get up there and like
Yeah. I can see that.
as long as, yeah, because a lot of the problem with it right now is it's just like you either go too far up top or you just walk out the door and the fight kind of breaks apart. But honestly, if you sanction it off properly, I think it could be a really good boss arena.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree on that point. Um,
Especially having the upper floor because you can lure one up, fight it one on one when the other one starts getting involved, drop down, one drops down, you fight it, you know what I mean? And you get kind of that loop.
well, I don't think we have enough time to talk about our dream bosses because I feel like that could go on for a while. Plus, I think I would much
Oh
rather
yeah.
spend more time, articulating what I would want from a dream boss. I would kind of hate to just throw something
Yeah,
in.
right.
But let's see.
Oh
I
yeah.
think we're caught
We'll have
up on
to
the
make
time that
that
we
a
lost.
whole podcast,
Do
to
what
be
now?
honest.
Yeah, yeah,
We'll make it a
definitely.
whole podcast because I can get into depth about boss design
Oh,
philosophy.
I mean, there's just many aspects of Elden Ring that could be a total podcast in general. I mean, just
Right?
I know what we've been discussing has just been a lot of just general things, but just there. I mean, I think we could have an entire podcast just talking about Shaded Castle.
Yeah, I would love that. If we do minor topics, I'll have to like jump in and actually engage in those areas and stuff to refresh so I can have like, because like I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm like forgetting boss names, like big set piece names. It's
Mm.
been years.
But
But yeah.
did you have any questions for me before we start wrapping up?
Um, Not really. No,
Okay,
I
okay.
think there's a lot of stuff we could talk about in depth, but I think it'd be better saved for another one.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, feel free if you would just if you think about something you want to ask me and you're afraid you might forget it, just definitely write it down for next time. And I want to
Yeah, I'll put it in
start
Discord.
I want to start throwing guests together, like have you and Punk Disorder on one time, and all three of us can talk. As
Yeah,
much I really appreciate the on ones definitely because
yeah,
sometimes
same.
someone won't be able to get a word in, and
Yeah,
it's unfortunate. That's why I try. I definitely I think maybe three is probably good, but I want to have at
yeah,
least one podcast. Like when I was advertising for a well, I wasn't advertising, but I was mentioning a 1,000 subscriber special podcast where I would have everybody from like the first few podcasts come in. But I don't know how well that would work with like five people all at once. But
yeah.
um, unfortunately, the subs started slowing down once I did that. I had a feeling that was going to happen once I'm like, oh yeah, we're getting close to 1,000 subs, so let's plan for a podcast. Then all of a sudden the sub game just stopped.
Well,
I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. um, so yeah, definitely thank you for coming on and thank you for this
yeah,
incredible conversation. It's nice being able to agree and disagree without having any kind of anger or beginning upset because it's pointless. It's video games. Why in the
yeah,
world? But I mean, it doesn't make any sense to get upset about something, and I feel like
yeah.
it's
We
just
have different goals and different things that we're getting out of the games. Not everybody's looking for the same thing.
oh yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, did you have any final thoughts? Anything at all?
No, just that we'll stay in touch, and I look forward to talking to you more. Feel
Uh,
free to hit me up anytime, man, if you want to hang out, or we could try getting. I know we're both limited on time. We both got our own lives and stuff, but I'm
oh
down to
yeah,
do a co-op run or something sometime.
yeah, that'd be fun. I have a lot of
Right?
ideas for like co-op challenges, but I don't
Heck yeah.
know hardly anyone that wants to participate.
Oh, I'm down
Like
for some
you're
crazy
yeah,
stuff.
I
If
think
you
you're
want to do a really crazy like role play type one where we like restrict ourselves to very specific things, like one of us being exclusively healer or something, the other person having this or that.
as
Like,
as long as it's not endurance based on a boss I don't like. But I
oh,
don't know.
dude, endurance
It
fights even can be great, where you have like a really long fight, but you have like longevity in the fight, and you can both heal or something, and there's sustainability.
mm,
Like especially with Elden Ring, with being able to regen FP off like criticals and stuff, and
yeah.
then any other thing, like you can get a fight lasting so long that way.
Well,
Where
maybe I don't know. Maybe there might be some bosses that I actually like a lot more with kind of a team going. I don't know.
yeah, Yeah, we'll
Um,
have to talk about it and keep stuff in mind. Just we got time.
oh yeah, definitely. But all right, we that's uh that's Matthew Manney, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Matthew Manney, for
Yep.
coming on. And I know your channel is basically just boss challenge uploads, but is there anything you wanted to announce for that channel, in specific, specifically, or?
So I have a lot of ideas for it, right? Like I want to upload like design philosophy videos
Oh,
where I
nice.
like am more coordinated and careful about my words, and I talk about game design philosophy and areas that it needs to improve, and like things that are lost and things that I think of by myself. And I also want to upload like music that I make in the future and put music alongside my fights and do stuff like that. So that's kind of some future ideas I have. I still plan on playing the future games and doing other games and uploading all kinds of stuff. And if I have fun with the game, I'll probably upload something from it. Like I'm playing Hogwarts Legacy right now, and you can expect to see something from that for sure. Um, that's most of what I do, but I have a lot of other random goofy things on there. They're definitely unique, but it's not for everybody. You gotta like really like the game and the bosses to even care to enjoy them. But I mostly make them for me. But in the future, I do plan on expanding and possibly making a second channel and making it more focused on things that more people would be interested in, like I said, design philosophy or you know actual breakdowns of bosses and what I think about them. Really breaking into like aspects of a game and how I feel. I think that would be a little more educational and better.
Awesome, awesome. And I try to interact with your videos as much as I can. But like there's some particular boss fights you upload that I haven't really fully experienced, so I can't really add too much to it.
Yeah.
Plus, I don't want to be spoiled. But
Yep.
stuff like Mog, I don't know. I'm still on the fence about how I feel about the design of Mog. So I don't, but I don't want to get into that right now.
Spent a
Um,
lot of time with them, and me too.
but all right, if you want to stick around so we can just talk a little bit more after we stop recording, that'd be great.
Yeah.
We'll go
Well,
ahead and end it here. Say goodbye to everybody.
all right. Bye, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. If you got to this point, I love you. I appreciate you.
All right, thank you, everyone.